Good morning and welcome to the March 2019 open meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Before I turn it over to our guest secretary, I want to recognize the congressional staff that's here in attendance today. Welcome. We are thrilled that you are here. We have valued the partnership with you over the past several years and look forward to your excitement and enthusiasm as we explore some of the arcana of the Code of Federal Regulations in Title 47. We also want to recognize Linda Oliver, who is here, sitting in for our general counsel, Tom Johnson. Linda, good luck. We'll try not to pepper you with too many questions or offbeat APA issues. Madam Secretary, could you please announce our agenda for the morning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, commissioners.
Good morning. For
today's meeting, you will hear 5 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a first report and order that would adopt rules to make available 21.2 gigahertz of spectrum above 95 gigahertz for unlicensed operations and create a new class of experimental licenses for the 95 gigahertz to 3 terahertz spectrum range. Second, you will consider a 4th further notice of proposed rulemaking that proposes a vertical or Z-axis location accuracy metric in connection with wireless E911 calls. Third, you will consider a report and order that implements Congress's directive in the Reimbursement Expansion Act that the Commission reimburse certain low-power television translator, and FM broadcast stations for costs incurred as a result of the Commission's broadcast television spectrum incentive auction. Fourth, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking that would explore how potential changes to our partitioning, disaggregation, and leasing rules might better close the digital divide and increase spectrum access by small and rural carriers, fulfilling the Commission's requirement under the Mobile Now Act. Fifth, you will consider a 4th report and order to implement the Improving Rural Call Quality and Reliability Act of 2017 by establishing service quality standards for intermediate providers. This is your agenda for today. The first item on your agenda, entitled Spectrum Horizons, James Edwin Wedby petition for rulemaking to allow unlicensed operation in the 95 to 1,000 gigahertz band, will be presented by the Office of Engineering and Technology, and Julius Knapp, Chief of the Office, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Knapp, we will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Throughout its history, the Commission has been challenged to find ways to accommodate new radio services and devices. As technology has advanced, we've made use of ever higher parts of the spectrum. OET is proud to present for your consideration an item that would open up opportunities in the uppermost part of the radio spectrum, those frequencies that are above 95 gigahertz. It's our privilege to be joined at the table by Professor Ted Rappaport, who heads the NYU Wireless Research Center in the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department at the New York University's Tandon School of Engineering. He's also the founding director of that center. Ted has been a leader in developing technology for the millimeter wave bands, including the spectrum above 95 gigahertz. He's here to tell you about some of the exciting developments and opportunities that lie ahead in that region of the spectrum. But before he gets there, it's a lot of spectrum and we've got a lot of people to thank. Here with me at the table is Brian Butler, Ira Keltz, Aspa Perutzis, and Michael Ha, all of OET. And I'd also like to thank from OET, Hugh Van Tile, Bauman Badapur, Jameson Prime, Nicholas Oros, Bill Hurst, Steve Jones, Rashmi Doshi, and Siobhan Philemon. From the General Counsel's Office, Deborah Broderson and Andrea Kearney, Steve Wenzo from the Wireless Bureau, Nicole Anjoli from Managing Director's Office, and Maura McGowan of the Office of Business Opportunities. And after Ted's presentation, Brian Butler of my staff will present the item.
Terrific. Welcome, Professor Rappaport. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Julie. Thank you so much. Today, before you, it's a historic day. Several years ago, no one would have believed millimeter waves, frequencies 30 to 300 gigahertz would work, and today you are opening up spectrum to allow new applications like we've never seen. I have a few slides. If they could put the slides up, I'll show you what some of the applications and exciting vision will be. We've never, in the history of the U.S., opened up spectrum above 95 gigahertz. And if you look at the next slide to give an idea of where we are in the spectrum, you can see the microwave, where cellular has worked below 6 gigahertz, is not yet millimeter wave, and you're leading revolutionary auctions to allow the spectrum opening up from 24 gigahertz all the way up to 70, 80 gigahertz, where the millimeter waves are, where the wavelengths become so small, you actually can start making phased array antennas that can beam the energy. It's remarkable. And today, you're opening up new spectrum, which allows us to move all the way up to the terahertz range. And at terahertz, there are things we can do that we never thought our smartphone would do. Terahertz is still below visible light, and it's well below ultraviolet and X-ray and gamma ray. And when you get up to those frequencies above light, ultraviolet, X-ray, gamma ray, that's where the energy is ionizing. But we're at safe frequencies still well below a visible light here at these frequencies. So you're doing a great job opening up new applications. I'll show some of those now in the next slide. Just to give you an idea of where we've been in the last 90 years, everything's been below 6 gigahertz, from FM radio to cellular to Wi-Fi. And really, the hard work of all of you and the FCC over the last several years to open up the millimeter wave spectrum has given the U.S. a great opportunity to compete on the world stage as we move above 6 gigahertz with bandwidths greater than we ever thought possible. But what you're doing today with this first report and order is opening up even greater frequencies where even greater bandwidths will happen. Now, some people believe that you can't do much at these frequencies above 95 gigahertz. Well, that's what they thought about millimeter wave going above 6 gigahertz. And at NYU, we proved to the world, and the commission did the hard work to show that indeed you can work and even work better at these higher frequencies with more bandwidth than before. When you get up to above 100 gigahertz, though, what you see is you still have amazing amounts of spectrum, far more than we've ever had historically. Because the air attenuation, how much the oxygen and water vapor attenuate signals, really is not bad up to 100, 200, even up to 400 or 500 gigahertz. These plots show that going all the way up to 500 gigahertz, you could still have mobile communications, Wi-Fi, backhaul, rural. So many things are possible. There are some bands where you have to worry about the attenuation because the water molecules will block the signal, but there's a lot of runway, more spectrum than we've ever had. And rain, you can see that rain attenuation flattens out at about 100 gigahertz. So once you go above 100 gigahertz, more rain is not going to impact the signal. So we can design links, mobile, fixed, wireless applications well into the future, and you're giving the country the opportunity to do that. Next slide shows that other parts of the world are already looking at the spectrum above 95 gigahertz with planning for the World Radio Conference 2019 and activity already happening in Europe in 2015. So it's great that the Commission is moving forward and giving the research and development complex and the commercial complex a runway to start looking at this great spectrum opportunity. It's interesting to note in Japan, there's already an unlicensed band available up around the 120 gigahertz band, and your proposal's very exciting because it provides some harmonization there. Next slide, you can see that the applications that become possible at these frequencies above 95 gigahertz are kind of mind-blowing. Science fiction will become reality. When you have such great bandwidths, and as we move to wider bandwidth channels in the future, 20 gigahertz or more, you can start having data rates that approach the bandwidth needed to provide cognition. I call this wireless cognition, where the computations of the human brain at those data rates could actually be sent on the fly over wireless. So you could have very low power, low computing devices like drones or robotics actually receive in real time over wireless the kind of perception and cognition that the human brain could do. That's unheard of, but it will allow amazing applications in robotics and machinery and in communication and computing that we've never seen. There's sensing, where at these frequencies you could sense your personal health, air quality. You could detect explosives. And gesturing, where you move and the wireless wavelength's so small, you could pick up very small movements and actually never have to touch your smartphone. We'll be talking and moving our fingers without touching an appliance at these frequencies. Imaging comes along, see in the dark cameras. Our smartphone will allow us to see around corners. And then the wireless communication bandwidths will be so wide and so vast, we can imagine wireless replacing a lot of entrenched aging cable and providing new bandwidths that we've never seen. The next slide shows that these ideas are really viable. Drones delivering boxes with the massive communication data rates, or autonomous vehicles, holographic imaging, seeing the things that allow us to use this wireless bandwidth to really provide on-the-fly computation at low cost, closely located data servers, communicating to very low power devices that don't have to have the power consumption on board. The next slide shows some of the ideas in imaging, where you can detect things in a chocolate bar or see around corners or know that you're not going to collide, drones not colliding with each other, being able to sense to within centimeter accuracy. And the next slide shows that wireless communications, not just backhaul and mobile, certainly will be possible, but also chip to chip and data center communications, where the computational speeds can be carried in close range or over distance of several hundreds of meters for cellular. Next slide shows that we're working at NYU Wireless. We're doing some of the first measurements at 140 gigahertz. We're studying the outdoor and indoor propagation characteristics so the wireless industry can learn how to build systems and Wi-Fi networks just like we did in 5G. And you can see on the next slide something that's really important to know. And commissioners, if I'm going to do one teaching element, this is it. This is something that most of the industry doesn't understand, but it's really remarkable. And what you've done today is really terrific. This is how the world, most of the engineers in the world, think of wireless. If you look at this curve, it shows that as you go higher in frequency and you go out to distance, you get more loss. That is, the conventional wisdom is that as you go higher in frequency, the channel becomes lossy. That's only if you use an omnidirectional antenna, the old way of doing cellular 10 and 20 years ago. When you start using directional antennas, what happens is you actually do better as you go higher in frequency for a given power level and a given antenna physical size. In fact, the next slide shows simulation and measurement, which totally debunks the myth that most of the industry thinks, which is higher frequencies are more lossy. It's true that weather, rain, foliage can create problems, but in clear weather, you actually get more power received for a given physical size of the antenna. That is, you go up higher in frequency, you get better signal-to-noise ratio. You basically get more bandwidth for free for the same battery power. It's a remarkable result, and the world will help learn this better through your first report and order today. We've measured penetration loss through typical materials, glass, drywall, and the next slide shows, in fact, that we can now predict the scattering. What happens when you bounce a radio wave off a drywall or off a building? This is vital for the engineering complex. Students are working hard at NYU, and we have papers coming out which will help the industry design these future mobile, fixed, and unlicensed systems. The next slide shows that here are some of the early results when you go from 28 and 73 gigahertz up to 140 gigahertz. Indeed, you get a bit more loss trying to go through drywall or glass, but the loss is not that substantial. A few more dB. Well, you can make up a few dB by an antenna the same physical size as you go to these frequencies. In other words, we're going to get much more directionality, much more focused energy going up to higher frequencies in the same physical area. So we can combat all of these things that we're seeing, which means that above 95 gigahertz is the future bastion for mobile fixed wireless. If you look at the final slides, I just want to mention that it's an honor to be here. I really commend all of the commissioners, the FCC staff who have worked so hard for so many years to bring these capabilities to America. You've kept us in the game and leading the game on 5G with all of your hard work. And today I think you can really start the race to 6G as we look at applications we've never had before. Finally, I want to give a big thank you to the National Science Foundation, which supports our work at NYU Wireless, and the 14 industrial affiliate companies from around the world that have been funding and encouraging us to work. But most of all, thanks to all of you.
Thanks, Ted.
Thanks.
Usually, when I hear this kind of presentation in school, it's followed by pop quiz. I don't think we're going to do that today. Brian will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Spectrum Horizons first report in order before you would take key steps to encourage innovation in the spectrum above 95 gigahertz. These frequencies lie at the horizon of what has, until recent years, been considered the highest range of usable spectrum. However, as you have heard, recent research and advancements in radio technology offer exciting opportunities to make productive use of this spectrum. The item would create a new category of experimental licenses crafted exclusively for the 95 gigahertz to 3 terahertz range. These Spectrum Horizons experimental licenses will give innovators more flexibility compared to the existing experimental licensing rules, including a longer license term and greater license transferability to encourage investment. They will also allow the sale of equipment during the license term. These licenses are designed to help us quickly develop a real-world record of which potential new uses are most ready to thrive in these bands. Additionally, the item would make 21.2 gigahertz of spectrum available for use by unlicensed devices in 4 frequency bands. These frequency bands are characterized by high attenuation of radio waves. This means that the signals will only travel a short distance. This is advantageous in that it both limits the potential for interference and permits large numbers of unlicensed devices to share the spectrum. The first report in order is designed to balance opportunities for innovation with efficient spectrum management. It protects against interference to federal users who already have access to parts of this spectrum for activities such as scientific research. It also recognizes a bright future for the 95 gigahertz to 3 terahertz band with the potential to expand our licensing and service rules based upon the experimental results and experience gained from unlicensed use. For these reasons, the Office of Engineering and Technology recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges to make technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Rappaport as well. You've helped over a decade and a half to lay the intellectual foundation for these types of issues, showing what the potential is, and you are helping to translate that into the practical. And so in collaboration with our FCC's fantastic staff, we really appreciate your being here today and all of the work you've done to signal the way towards these spectrum horizons. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Professor. I really appreciate your presentation. Actually, very helpful putting all of this into context. My apologies for being a little stuffed up in the head, and it's that kind of season. But I look forward to joining with the professor. We're going to do an event in April in New York, so I look forward to furthering this conversation. But on with my statement. Count me all in for the efforts to provide spectrum to the wireless community to create new, innovative technologies and applications for the future, even if they may be a few years away. I look forward to watching what America's entrepreneurs, innovators, and scientists can do with frequencies above 95 gigahertz. These bands have their propagation challenges, and right now we do not know what services they will support. But not too long ago, people scoffed at the idea of commercial use in the millimeter waves, as Professor Rappaport referenced. Therefore, I support allocating these frequencies for experimental and unlicensed uses. While I strenuously advocate for both licensed and unlicensed spectrum opportunities, I understand it may be a bit premature to establish exclusive use licenses above 95 gigahertz when there is great uncertainty about what technologies will be introduced and what spectrum would be ideal or what size channel blocks are needed. Therefore, I can support waiting to see what develops. Better that than being forced to undo a mess later. Further, I've been assured that the bands being allocated for unlicensed use in this item are not ideal for licensed services. Therefore, today's allocation should not interfere with future licensing activities. Finally, today's action in no way reduces the need for unlicensed allocations elsewhere, especially in the mid-bands. While we are providing opportunities for the technology of the future, there's still great need for spectrum to expand the unlicensed technologies of today. Two items that the Commission can and should move quickly are revisiting the sordid history of the 5.9 gigahertz band and taking the unnecessary steps to open the 6 gigahertz band for unlicensed use. I thank the Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. For my part, I first heard about 6G a few months back when my colleague, Commissioner Rosenworcel, gave a speech on it at Mobile World Congress in San Francisco and said that we need to start thinking about it. At the time, I thought you meant for us on the dais to start thinking about it, and over the past month, it's been clear that perhaps there's a different audience that took up the call to pitch 6G and has now been elevated into the higher conscious of the country. But that's a good thing.
I think a lot of people were listening to my speech.
That's right. One reason the U.S. leads the world in wireless is that we've moved quickly to open up new spectrum bands for innovative use. We don't wait around for technologies to develop fully before unlocking spectrum so that entrepreneurs have the incentives to invest and experiment. You can see it with our steps in the 1980s to identify unlicensed spectrum, which years later allowed Wi-Fi to flourish. You can see it in the early 2000s when we freed up spectrum above 40 gigahertz, which is commonly used today for vehicle radar and other technologies. And you can see it when we opened up millimeter wave spectrum back when many still doubted that it could support 5G or any mobile wireless use. We continue this trend today by giving entrepreneurs greater access to spectrum above 95 gigahertz, which is already home to a number of pioneering technologies. This will help ensure that innovators in the U.S. have the incentives to invest and develop new technologies for the benefit of all Americans. Now, it took a lot of hard work from the FCC teams and the Office of Engineering Technology, Wireless Bureau, International Bureau, to get this order across the finish line, as well as some great work from those in academia as well. So I want to thank you all for developing today's order. It has my support.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Welcome to the far frontier of spectrum policy. And, you know, with apologies to Buzz Lightyear, these are the airwaves that will take us to infinity and beyond. We are, of course, talking about the airwaves above 95 gigahertz. And today we are putting these stratospheric frequencies to use by adopting a new set of experimental rules for their operation. Access will be granted on a non-interfering basis following federal coordination. In addition, we authorize unlicensed activity in a set of 4 bands and specify the power limits and out-of-band emissions limits for their operation. I think this is good for starters. However, going forward, we need to remember that the policies that led to spectrum success in lower frequencies won't necessarily be the policies that serve us in these way up there airwaves. After all, our century-old approach to spectrum policy, with its rigid, exclusively licensed bands allocated over large geographic areas, is not especially well suited to the airwaves we discuss today. That is because the propagation challenges with spectrum above 95 gigahertz are real. At upper bounds, signals over these airwaves may not travel much further than from one end of this dais to the other before losing their strength. Moreover, there are no existing systems to protect in much of this spectrum. Plus, these high frequencies permit the use of newer antenna designs like quasi-optical antennas, which allow transmitters to better control the direction of their signals. Add all of this up, and the likelihood of interference is too low to justify a traditional approach with high administrative costs. To this end, I do not believe that this order gets it quite right when it suggests that the frequencies above 95 gigahertz are suitable for licensed use. I am pleased that we don't actually take up such an approach in today's decision. I believe that with these way up there frequencies, where the potential for interference is so low, we should flip the script. The burden should be on those seeking exclusive licenses to demonstrate how their interference case and justify why we should carve up an otherwise open space for innovation and experimentation. So I hope we can continue with a modern approach to spectrum allocation that is better suited to these far-flung frequencies. Finally, it is worth noting that the spectrum we work with here is different from our lower frequency bands in yet another important way. Much of it is subject to the authority of both this agency and the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. As recent experience demonstrates, we need more meaningful and transparent coordination with our federal partners so that we can realize the full opportunities in these stratospheric airwaves. Otherwise, I fear that the opportunities for new experimental operations could be blocked and important scientific research could be diminished. But with that said, thank you all for your work today. Thank you, Professor, for your enlightening summary. And I'd ask that his slides are made available on our website later today.
They will be.
Terrific. This has my full support.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the defining features of our human experience is our curiosity, the drive to understand why the apple falls from the tree or to see what's on the other side of the mountain. It's fitting then that this proceeding is entitled The Spectrum Horizons, as we prepare to explore uncharted territory in our spectrum. The spectrum we open today was once thought to be too high of a frequency for any mainstream use. But as Dr. Rappaport explained earlier, we now see that it has the potential to change lives for the better. Terahertz spectrum imaging could change the way doctors and researchers understand biological processes on the cellular and even smaller level. Doctors could use this technology to conduct non-invasive cancer screening tests, meaning earlier detection and more lives saved. And in the security setting for national security, terahertz spectroscopy can be used to identify dangerous materials and weapons, meaning threats could be identified early without body scans. Opening previously unused bands of spectrum spur unexpected innovation. And in the most authentic sense, we step into the unknown today. And while today's action is bold, we must also act smartly and modernize our approach to these bands. And it is something that we should look at, I believe, is harmful interference. As we've authorized new technologies, we have encountered unexpected interference, and whether it was wireless calls from consumer signal boosters or LED lights, unauthorized operations in the recently authorized CBRS band, or interference to weather radar operations from unlicensed wireless broadband transmission systems. In each instance, unexpected interference required the Commission to investigate and, of course, something dear to my heart, determine whether enforcement was needed, including potential policy changes as well. And so as we look to the future today, we should consider interference that can arise. This comports with a core mission of the Commission and one of my overall goals, which is to support rules that are clear and well-defined so that if any infractions do occur, we can address it and hold any potential violators accountable. With that, I'd address 2 points. First, the FCC does have a very critical role in detecting and resolving any interference that may occur. And once the Commission authorizes services in a band, parties can and do reasonably expect that operations will be free from any harmful interference that violates our rules. The talented staff in OET work very hard to set technical standards to ensure just that. And then, of course, where needed, the Enforcement Bureau's agents and attorneys investigate and can take action. But I know today that the Commission staff cannot altogether investigate with the necessary tools and training as we get into these higher and higher bands. Today, we open up the bands above 95 gigahertz, including bands up to 3 terahertz. But the plain fact of the matter is that I have some questions about the Enforcement Bureau's ability to even detect interference in these and other high-frequency bands. As of now, we're not currently capable of policing a significant amount of millimeter wave spectrum, and in fact, the very high-frequency bands that are critical to 5G. And I want to make a call for sufficient resources to developing these 21st century enforcement tools as we look to interference. And that's not to say that the Commission has in any way erred in what we do here today. To the contrary, the Commission has a statutory responsibility to identify new spectrum bands and apply innovative policy to maximize our spectrum and its efficiency. But the bands we discussed today could be critical to private health and public safety now and in the future, and we owe it to the American people to make sure that we can be an effective cop on the beat as we open up a new spectrum neighborhood. And that means devoting the funds necessary for the equipment and training to allow our staff to fully resolve any interference issues should they occur. The second point I'd make very quickly is that we do need to continue to evaluate whether we should reconsider our approach to spectrum management for both these new and existing spectrum bands. Spectrum is the foundation for innovation, and as we make more spectrum available, we should ensure that our rules are maximizing all of our bands. In February of 2017, in response to a recommendation from this agency's Technological Advisory Council, the TAC, OET has sought comment on whether the agency should adopt new policies on spectrum management guidance and principles. Some of those questions included, is our current definition of harmful interference appropriate? Should we reconsider what constitutes an acceptable level of interference? And how should the Commission assess the risk of harmful interference? This comment period in that proceeding closed over a year ago, and I would welcome the opportunity to continue to tackle these questions head-on as we modernize our spectrum policy. To close, opening spectrum, once thought unusable, is very good policy. It encourages innovation and the deployment of new technologies that will change all of our lives for the better. But before we cross that spectrum horizon, we must make sure that we are equipped and prepared for the journey. And I look forward to hearing further from the experts inside and outside the agency on how to make sure we maximize our spectrum resources, including the Enforcement Bureau having the resources and training to investigate fully where the resolution of interference issues is needed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. The horizon for air travel was once thought to be the speed of sound, Mach 1. But on October 14th, 1947, pilot and World War II Air Force Captain Chuck Yeager stepped into his Bell X-1 airplane, dubbed the Glamorous Glennis. Despite having 2 broken ribs, which prevented him from being able to shut his cockpit door by himself, he made the first airplane flight to break the sound barrier. And he didn't stop there. By 1953, Yeager, who just celebrated his 96th birthday last month, had once again extended the horizon for flight, setting a new airspeed record of 1,650 miles per hour, nearly 1,000 miles per hour faster than the flight that broke the sound barrier. Well, today we too extend the horizon, this time with respect to spectrum. Just like Mach 1 speeds, the airwaves above 95 gigahertz, extremely high-frequency, short wavelength bands of spectrum, were previously thought to be unapproachable, or in our case, for wireless applications. However, recent evolutions in technology have led to increased interest in developing these bands, these spectrum horizons, for new services and applications, or as Professor Rappaport aptly put it, science fiction will become reality. New applications such as personal health monitoring systems and see-in-the-dark imaging and centimeter-level position and robotics, I mean, all of these things and more could be on tap, as Professor Rappaport's presentation pointed out. Well, so today, we take big steps towards making productive use of this spectrum. We allocate a massive 21 gigahertz for unlicensed use, and we create a new category of experimental licenses. And these 2 steps will give innovators strong incentives to develop new technologies using these airwaves, while also protecting existing passive uses. Now, these steps are groundbreaking, no doubt about it, but I'm confident that there will be more ground to break. We will continue to watch the development of these spectrum horizons, including the potential for non-experimental licensed uses of spectrum above 95 gigahertz in the future. And we will continue to act boldly so that the United States continues to lead in wireless innovation. Now, today's item would not be possible without the work of our forward-thinking staff. Julie mentioned them, but it bears mentioning again because they put in so much hard work on quite literally a new field of engineering here. And so I want to thank Baman Badipur, Brian Butler, Rashmi Doshi, Michael Ha, William Hurst, Stephen Jones, Ira Keltz, Julie Knapp, Nicholas Oros, Aspa Perutzis, Siobhan Philemon, Jameson Prime, and Hugh Ventile from the Office of Engineering and Technology, Steve Wenzo from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Nicole Anglais from the Office of Managing Director, Maura McGowan from the Office of Communications Business Opportunities, and Andrea Kearney and Deborah Broderson from the Office of General Counsel. A terrific interdisciplinary cross-agency effort, along with collaboration with great academics like Professor Rappaport. Well, with that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Aye.
Commissioner Carr.
Approve?
Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks to all of you for the great work. Madam Secretary, could you please take us to item number 2 on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the second item will be presented by the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, and it's entitled Wireless E911 Location Accuracy Requirements. Lisa Folks, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And Ms. Folks, whenever you and your team are ready, the floor is yours. This mic or that mic?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Morning.
Consumers expect that when they dial 911, first responders are able to locate them and render emergency assistance. Plain and simple. Fast emergency response is critical to saving lives. The Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau remains focused on helping emergency responders quickly and accurately locate people who make wireless 911 calls regardless of their location. As consumers increasingly cut the cord on landline phone service, and an estimated 80% of 911 calls are placed from wireless phones, the need for precise indoor location information is of ever-growing importance. This is particularly true in large multi-story buildings where first responders may lose precious time finding a caller's floor and room number. The Commission's enhanced 911 rules require wireless providers to meet an increasingly stringent series of location accuracy benchmarks that apply to both outdoor and indoor wireless 911 calls. With respect to a 911 caller's vertical location, which is important for calls from multi-story buildings, the rules provide 2 options. Wireless providers can either deliver dispatchable location, which includes the caller's street address plus additional information such as a suite or apartment number, or they can deliver the caller's vertical location in the building, referred to as the Z-axis. The Commission directed the nationwide wireless providers to test vertical location technologies and submit a proposal for measuring Z-axis location accuracy. Recently, the Bureau solicited public comment on industry's proposal, and we closely reviewed the record, including input from the public safety community. Today, we present a 4th further notice of proposed rulemaking that proposes a vertical location accuracy metric that would enable first responders to identify the floor level for most wireless 911 calls made from multi-story buildings. This could reduce emergency response times and ultimately save lives. With me at the table this morning are David Firth, Deputy Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, Michael Wilhelm, Chief of the Bureau's Policy and Licensing Division, John Evanoff, Deputy Division Chief, and Nellie Fosner and Brenda Boykin, Attorney Advisors in the division. I would like to thank them and other staff for this hard work on this item, as well as the other bureaus and offices that contributed. Ms. Fosner will present the item.
Thank you, Chief Folks. Good morning, Chairman Pai and Commissioners.
Good morning.
Today's notice proposes a 3-meter vertical accuracy, or Z-axis metric, for wireless 911 calls. This is a key step in the implementation of our rules to help first responders and 911 call centers locate wireless 911 callers quickly and accurately when a consumer calls from indoor locations such as multi-story buildings. In 2015, the Commission adopted rules requiring providers to deploy either dispatchable location or Z-axis technology in the top 25 and 50 cellular market areas for April 3rd, 2021 and April 3rd, 2023, respectively. Non-nationwide wireless providers that serve any of the top 50 markets have an additional year to meet these benchmarks. The item before you proposes a Z-axis accuracy metric of plus or minus 3 meters for 80% of wireless indoor calls to 911. The item tentatively concludes that this level of location accuracy, no more than 3 meters above or below the location of the phone that calls 911, is sufficiently precise to identify a caller's floor level in most cases. This can be an important time saver for first responders when they respond to an emergency in a multi-story building. The item also notes that the proposed 3-meter metric is more precise than the proposed metric submitted by the wireless providers, but tentatively concludes, based on data from the testbed and ongoing improvements in location technology, that a 3-meter metric is technically feasible and can be implemented within the timeframe specified in the rules. Consistent with the approach the Commission has taken throughout this proceeding, the proposed Z-axis metric would be technologically neutral. In addition, the item notes that wireless providers will continue to have the option of providing dispatchable location as provided under existing rules. We also see comment on any privacy and security concerns associated with Z-axis data. The Bureau recommends adoption of this fourth further notice of proposed rulemaking and requests editorial privileges for technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. We look forward to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Chief Folks indicated, the Commission's location accuracy rules require wireless providers to deploy either dispatchable addresses or Z-axis metric solutions so that first responders have the best information possible to find a person in need within a multi-story building. Throughout this proceeding, I have expressed that our vertical location accuracy requirements must be based on proven technologies, that deadlines must be realistic, and that our rules must be technology neutral. Today's notice proposes a Z-axis approach that looks to strike that right balance. While the wireless industry initially advocated for a 5-meter Z-axis metric, it recognized that the public safety community was not in agreement, and to provide certainty, it is willing to test a 3-meter metric in its established testbed. Currently, 2 vendors appear capable of providing vertical location accuracy results within 3 meters in some scenarios with a consistency that would comply with our rules. Early testbed results, however, do not support a 2-meter Z-axis metric, which was supported by some in the record. I plan on following this issue closely and will want to see that there is solid evidence to ensure that the metric the Commission eventually picks is feasible in the applicable timelines. Further, I applaud the efforts of the wireless industry to perfect technologies capable of providing accurate vertical location, Besides Z-axis technologies, the industry continues to work on a database to make a dispatchable location or providing an address along with a floor, apartment, or suite number a reality. Device manufacturers are also working on technologies to provide accurate location information. I reiterate my firm belief that we must promote technology neutrality and that wireless providers should have a choice of solutions and vendors that they can utilize to meet our rules. In light of the recent press releases and reports, I will also restate my concern that location accuracy information should not be used in a way that to infringe on the rights of American citizens. This location accuracy proceeding is about providing first responders with life-saving information, not a vehicle to aggregate location information that can be used to provide to others. This data should not be made available for use by government agencies to locate, monitor, and take actions that are harmful to Americans. Finally, I appreciate the questions added by the new Office of Economics and Analytics to facilitate a more thorough cost-benefit analysis. I'm very pleased that although there's discussion to the Commission's past use of the flawed value of statistical life standard, the item seeks to elicit data on various Z-axis options presented in the record so that we can do an appropriate cost-benefit analysis to inform the Commission's decision-making. I thank the Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Carr.
At the PSAP in Pasco County, Florida, small light posts are attached to each of the cubicles. They almost look like miniature street lights with stacked red, yellow, and green light bulbs. In calm moments, the lights shine green. indicating that no one is calling in for help. Aside from those lights at those times, the PSAP could seem like any other office, with coworkers chatting while scrolling through databases on their computer screens. But then a light flashes red. 911 operator, what is your emergency? In that moment, no one knows what will come next. Mike, a 911 dispatcher from Pasco County, says he's trained for anything, a misdialed number or a life in danger. The on and off adrenaline every day has to be stressful, and I asked Mike about it. He said if you like helping people, there's no better job. When PSAP operators like Mike first answer a 911 call, they try to learn the nature of the problem, who the caller is, and then, of course, where the emergency is occurring. Now, landline calls have the advantage of tying the caller to a specific address. But today, more than 80% of 911 calls are made from wireless devices. When the phone number you're calling from travels with you, figuring out the call's origin and routing it to the right answering point presents challenges. So since 1996, the FCC has promulgated rules requiring service providers to assist emergency responders with pinpointing the location of 911 calls. The latest location challenge is height. Although we may be accustomed to Uber or Waze using our smartphones' location sensors to optimize their services automatically, less is done with height data. And yet knowing on what floor an emergency is occurring can mean the difference between life and death. Smartphone manufacturers, wireless providers, and entrepreneurs have been hard at work trying to solve this problem. One approach is to use various transmitters, including Bluetooth and Wi-Fi devices, as beacons to locate an emergency call. Since 2016, Google has relied in part on this strategy for its own emergency location services. Wireless providers are trying a similar approach through the NIAD. The NIAD uses the registered addresses of various beacons to provide a potentially dispatchable address to PSAPs. Now, a different way of solving the problem is to use the phone's own barometric pressure sensor to add height data to latitude and longitude. The Commission required wireless providers to test this technology over the last couple of years. Two companies that submitted their technology to the testbed produced somewhat different results. One identified height location with claiming an accuracy of less than 2 meters. The other came within 5 meters. Given the state of technology, wireless providers propose that we require height accuracy to be reported to a PSAP within 5 meters. The public safety community rejected this, arguing that 3-meter accuracy is technically feasible and would allow first responders to get the right floor the first time in many more cases. We sided with public safety. Furthermore, we preserve the option to choose an even more stringent standard than 3 meters based on the record that develops in this proceeding. So I look forward to additional submissions from technologists educating the Commission on the feasibility of height standards that we propose in this notice when we get to the order. So I want to thank Public Safety Bureau for your work on this notice. It's important. It has my support.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
A little over 5 years ago, Mary Thomas suffered a stroke in an apartment in New York City. She instantly knew something was wrong, and she mustered up the strength to call 911. But like a lot of stroke victims, her speech was slurred. She pulled her wireless phone to her mouth, but was unable to clearly state to the dispatcher just where she was and what had happened. So the first responders turned to technology. The cell tower information from Ms. Thomas's phone gave an address for the call, but the address was wrong. It turns out in New York, it can be easy for public safety to get lost. So many buildings, so many floors, with apartments and offices stacked high in the sky. In fact, the first responders followed several false leads trying to track her call. All in all, they searched for 8 hours before they located Mary Thomas on the right floor. The 911 dispatcher stayed with her on the phone the whole time. This is an incredible story. But when I read about it a few years ago, it just stung. There are so many tall buildings in this country that reach the clouds, and so many more squat ones with a few floors spread over a large area. I wondered how many 911 calls come from these locations, how many of them come from wireless phones, and how many more lives could be saved if we ensured that every call includes precise dispatchable location for first responders. After all, no matter who you are or what floor you're on, when you call 911, you want public safety to find you. So I dug in. I studied the FCC rules governing 911 location accuracy and found they were behind the time. They were built for an era that assumed every call came from a traditional landline. In fact, when you call from a wired phone, public safety officials know your location with precision. But the vast majority of calls no longer come from wired phones. They come from wireless phones. And our rules were just this hodgepodge of standards for indoor and outdoor use that reflected calling patterns from decades ago. So 5 years ago, I wrote about Mary Thomas in an editorial. I testified about her experience and others like it before Congress. And I presented to this agency that we needed to do something about it and update our policy and fix our 911 rules. As a result, we adopted a new framework to improve location accuracy for 911 calls made from wireless phones. And that brings us to this rulemaking today. It proceeds on that same pathway set up a few years ago, but now specifically proposes that wireless carriers provide public safety with an indoor caller's vertical location within 3 meters. It suggests this should be accomplished in roughly the largest 50 metropolitan areas by 2023. I don't think this is ambitious enough. In the years since this framework was put in place, technology has evolved. It has improved. Our record reflects that it is possible to locate 911 callers with more precision, and I think we should be able to do it in less time all across the country. The truth is, a 3-meter policy does not provide public safety with precise floor location. As the text of this rulemaking acknowledges, it does not yield floor-level accuracy. I think that's a problem, because what happened to Mary Thomas should not happen again. We should choose standards that without fail provide floor-level accuracy. When police or firefighters show up in an emergency, the last thing they need to do is break out a measuring tape. We need a standard that tells them precisely where you are. I appreciate that this rulemaking has evolved since it was first put forward. It now includes a discrete question about floor levels. It also asks some important questions about privacy. But on the most fundamental level, it is organized around standards that unquestionably fall short of what first responders require to keep us safe. The fact is we need real precision if we want to be able to locate with floor-level accuracy every 911 call, and we need it fast. And on that score, this rulemaking misses the mark. I regretfully dissent.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We depend on the 911 system sending help when and where we need it. That call is made thousands of times every day throughout the country, and we all rely on help being just 3 digits away. The first responders who answer the calls are lifesavers in the truest sense, and we owe them our gratitude, and I thank them for everything that they do. The same goes for folks who answer our 911 calls. They are highly trained specialists who spend their days connecting people like you and me whenever we have our worst day. And to that degree, I'd like to acknowledge the work that my colleague, Commissioner Rosenworcel, has done to get them the recognition they deserve. If you imagine someone in a skyscraper calling 911, first responders rush to help. They arrive at the building within minutes, but they are 2 floors below. They are ready and equipped and close, but not close enough. It is essential that help arrives in the right place and on the right floor at the right time. Ensuring that first responders know what floor to go to when callers make indoor 911 calls within multi-story buildings is clearly no easy task. And this FNPRM gets us one step closer to incorporating this capability into the nation's 911 system, and I support that goal. There are things in this FNPRM that I do heavily believe are right, primarily getting Z-axis location accuracy requirements off the drawing board, out of the testing environment, and into our first responders' toolkits so that it can start saving lives as quickly as possible. But let me be clear, I don't see this FNPRM providing the final element of the Commission's indoor location accuracy regime. The wireless industry has worked hard to provide vertical location, or Z-axis capability, which is the ability of wireless networks to locate handsets within a few feet of their actual vertical location. Increasing vertical location accuracy will give first responders the tools that they need to find you on that right floor in the tall building. But people need solutions that get them help, not close to them, but directly to them. And while a 3-meter Z-axis metric, as this FNPRM proposes, will get first responders close, it still leaves about a 10-foot margin of error, which can send first responders to the floor above or below you. And I'm concurring in part because this FNPRM does not set out a clear path or propose a plan to get to that greater level of accuracy below the 3 meters. Only floor level accuracy will give first responders the right tools to go to the right floor the first time, every time. And so we need a plan to get there, and that plan has to be done as quickly as possible. The days where first responders don't know what floor to go to in a tall building must become history. I had several other concerns with this FNPRM as it was originally drafted. The first was whether the vertical location technology described in the FNPRM will work for consumers who use the Commission's Lifeline program. This FNPRM describes barometric pressure sensor technology used in most higher-end mobile handsets manufactured since 2016, and that can provide that information about the handset's altitude. But this technology cannot be life-saving if it does not include lifeline phones. Do they have it? This life-saving technology that we're asking about in this FNPRM needs to be available to everyone, everywhere. 911's most advanced features can't have an asterisk that says this won't save you if you use a lifeline phone. And this FNPRM now includes those questions that I called for based on that concern. My other concern had to do with data privacy and security. The rules on which this FNPRM seeks comment allow carriers to comply with vertical location accuracy requirement in 2 ways: through Z-axis technology, which we address here, or through the delivery of dispatchable location information, which is essentially the caller's address and floor number and suite number if they're in a tall building. And carriers have developed technology to obtain dispatchable location information using wireless networks that users' phones connect to when a 911 call is made. And recognizing the high degree of location accuracy that this technology delivers, the Commission adopted rules limiting the use of that data to the National Emergency Address Database, or NEAD, for those 911 calls. The Commission also required industry to develop a privacy and security plan for that data. I'm now glad that this FNPRM asks those important questions about the appropriate treatment of similarly situated Z-axis data and whether rules like those the Commission previously adopted for NEAD data should apply here. We need to build those protections in to make sure that consumers' sensitive location data is not misused and abused like we've been reading about in the news. I appreciate my colleagues agreeing with me that those questions must be included. We all hope to never need to call 911 for our loved ones or for ourselves. And when a 911 call comes inside a tall building, first responders have to know which floor to go to. This FNPRM moves us closer to that reality. So I'd like to thank the dedicated staff of Public Security for your tireless work on this issue and for this NPRM. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. The FCC is committed to ensuring that when you call 911, you will get the help that you need. We've taken several steps over the past 2 years to fulfill that commitment. Just last year, we began to explore how location-based routing technologies could help improve the routing of wireless 911 calls. We also began to implement Carey's Law, enacted in 2018, to ensure that consumers calling from multi-line telephone systems, such as those used in office buildings and hotels, can call 911 without having to dial a prefix first. And today, we seek to improve 911 with a proposal to help call centers and first responders locate 911 callers within multi-story buildings, the first ever such proposal in this agency's history. Specifically, we are proposing a way to enable first responders to figure out what floor you're on when you dial 911. Now, this is a big problem in many places. Call takers and first responders alike might know which building you're calling from and where in the building you are located from a horizontal perspective. But if that's a place like the FCC, this information alone might not be enough to find you. In technical terms, then, we are aiming for a vertical or Z-axis location accuracy metric of plus or minus 3 meters, about 10 feet, relative to the handset for 80% of indoor wireless 911 calls. If a 911 call transmits a location no more than 3 meters above or below your phone, then first responders can better determine what floor you're on in an apartment, a hotel, or another multi-story building. Now, this could reduce emergency response time and save lives. And this point was hammered home to me just last week during recent visits to New Jersey and Delaware. Captain Kevin Briggs, the 911 coordinator for Burlington County, New Jersey, told me this would be especially helpful when individuals can't articulate where they are, such as children or elderly people who are unable to communicate. And in Delaware, Anita Bell, the dispatch administrator for the Seaford Police Department, told me how vertical location technologies could be a huge benefit to first responders and 911 callers alike. Now, originally, as we have heard, the wireless industry proposed that our vertical location accuracy metric should be plus or minus 5 meters. But based on the results of the tests that have been conducted to date, as well as the input of public safety officials, I believe that a more stringent proposal is justified. And I have every expectation that our proposal of plus or minus 3 meters will give our nation's first responders useful information, perhaps life-saving information, within the time frames established by our location accuracy rules. I want to thank my colleagues for working together to build a bipartisan majority in favor of public safety. In particular, thank you to Commissioner Starks for bringing your expertise that lies at the intersection of public safety and consumer protection to bear on this proceeding. Your willingness and that of your staff to work in good faith with us and to put the priority of public safety over political gamesmanship helped us improve the item and deliver a proposal that the public safety community has embraced and we hope will enable us to implement in the future. Thanks as well to the fantastic staff of the Commission who worked on this item, specifically Brenda Boykin, Ken Carlberg, Rochelle Cohen, John Evanoff, Nellie Fusner, Lisa Folks, David Firth, Erica Olson, Austin Rendezzo, Rasul Savavian, and Michael Wilhelm from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, Shannon Wilkerson and Sanford Williams from the Office of Communications Business Opportunities, Eric Berger, Julia McHenry, Chuck Needy, and Emily Talaga from the Office of Economics and Analytics, and last but not least, Aspa Perutsis, Jameson Prime from the Office of Engineering and Technology, and Jonathan Campbell from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. We'll now proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
Commissioner Carr?
Approve.
Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Dissent.
Commissioner Starks?
Approve in part, concur in part.
The chair votes to approve. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks for the great work. Madam Secretary, could you please take us to item number 3 on today's agenda?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the third item on your agenda is entitled LPTV, TV Translator, and FM Broadcast Station, expanding the economic and innovation opportunities of spectrum through incentive auctions. And it will be presented by the Media Bureau. Michelle Carey, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Ms. Carey, welcome to the table, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Today, the Media Bureau presents a report and order that adopts rules to implement Congress's directive in the Reimbursement Expansion Act that Congress reimburse certain low-power television, TV translator, and FM stations for costs incurred as a result of the Commission's incentive auction and reorganization of broadcast television spectrum. With the adoption of this report and order, the Commission will meet its obligation under the REA to complete this rulemaking by March 23rd, 2019. Joining me at the table are Barbara Kreisman and Maria Malarkey of the Media Bureau, as well as Jean Cadu of the Incentive Auction Task Force. Maria will present the item.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, we are pleased to present this report and order implementing the REA. In the REA, Congress expanded the list of entities eligible to be reimbursed for repack-related expenses to include LPTV, TV translator, and FM stations, and provided additional funds to the reimbursement fund to be used for this purpose. The REA also increased the funds available to reimburse full power and Class A stations and MVPDs. The REA appropriated a total of $1 billion to the reimbursement fund, $600 million in fiscal year 2018, and $400 million in fiscal year 2019. The report and order concludes that the REA permits the Commission to use the funds appropriated to the reimbursement fund for fiscal year 2019 to reimburse eligible LPTV, translator, and FM stations, as well as full power and Class A stations and MVPDs, and that the Commission will prioritize payments to full power, Class A, and MVPD entities over payments to the newly eligible LPTV, translator, and FM entities. With respect to eligibility for LPTV and TV translator stations, the report and order concludes that LPTV and TV translator stations are eligible for reimbursement under the REA if, 1, they filed an application during the Commission's special displacement window and obtained a construction permit, and 2, were licensed and transmitting for at least 9 of the 12 months prior to April 13th, 2017, as required by the REA. The report and order concludes that the equipment and other costs necessary for an eligible LPTV or TV translator station to construct the facilities authorized by grant of the station's special displacement window application shall be considered eligible for reimbursement under the REA. With respect to eligibility for FM broadcast stations, the report and order concludes that full power FM stations, low power FM stations, and FM translators that were licensed and transmitting on April 13th, 2017, using the facilities affected by a repack television station are eligible for reimbursement under the REA. The report and order finds that the Commission will reimburse up to 100% of the costs of FM stations that had to permanently relocate, temporarily or permanently modify their facilities, or purchase or modify auxiliary facilities to provide service during construction work on a co-located, adjacent, or nearby repack television station's facilities. With respect to the reimbursement process for eligible LPTV, TV translator, and FM broadcast stations, the report and order adopts a procedure to reimburse the newly eligible entities that is substantially similar to that currently being used by the Commission to provide reimbursements to full power, Class A, and MVPD entities. The report and order also establishes strong measures to protect against waste, fraud, and abuse with respect to disbursements to LPTV, TV translator, and FM stations. The Media Bureau recommends that the Commission adopt this report and order and requests editorial privileges to make any necessary technical or conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Malarkey, for the presentation. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner O'Reilly.
I thank the Chair. I'm going to submit my statement and just make one point. I will spend a special focus on the execution of the funds for FM radio stations for legitimate costs in the repack process. I am sad to admit that this wasn't given sufficient attention when many of us worked on the Spectrum Act of 2012. Congress since rectified this, and I want to make sure that those funds go to that purpose, and I'll be spending some time to make sure that happens, so I appreciate the Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. If you're suggesting that staff that worked on it should be personally liable for those reimbursement costs, we could be happy to accommodate that in the item.
You're welcome to, but I believe there's something about getting blood from a stone.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Carr.
Thanks. I also have a short statement for the record, but just want to say here that this additional funding that Congress is providing is going to be particularly important for rural and remote communities that rely on these stations for emergency alerts and information, as well as the diverse voices represented among those stations. So thank you for your work on implementing this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
First step, it's Women's History Month, and this is the first time I've ever seen an all-female panel. So I'm just going to point that out. We could have more of them. This is a faithful implementation of the Reimbursement Expansion Act, and it has my full support.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
Yes, I'll also submit a more full statement for the record, but agree that this undertaking provides a good example of good government working as intended. In this instance, a legitimate need for additional resources was identified. Congress appropriated the funds. The Commission worked swiftly to adopt rules to get the money where it is needed most. So again, we'll submit a longer statement for the record, but thank you to the team for your hard work.
Thank you, Commissioner. I, too, will have a longer statement. I'll simply say that the work of the people who arrayed before us, as well as others in the Media Bureau, has enabled us to breathe life into the Reimbursement Expansion Act by setting up an important process for eligible LPTV and TV translator and FM radio stations to get the reimbursement for their legitimate repack-related expenses. And to manage our resources effectively, we are also adopting measures to guard against the waste, fraud, and abuse in the TV Broadcaster Relocation Fund. We want to make sure that every dollar is spent wisely, as Congress intended it. I, of course, will have more to say on the substance, but in terms of process, I want to thank the agency staff that worked very hard to meet a tight statutory deadline. So my thanks to Hilary DeNigro and Jean Cadieux from the Incentive Auction Task Force, to Joyce Bernstein, Jim Bradshaw, Michelle Carey, Martha Heller, Barbara Kreisman, Kim Matthews, Evan Morris, Maria Malarkey, and Tom Nessinger from the Media Bureau, and Dave Consul from the Office of General Counsel. We really appreciate the work to make this happen. With that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
Commissioner Carr?
Approve.
Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Approve.
Commissioner Starks?
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is granted. The editorial privilege is granted as requested. Thanks for the great work. Madam Secretary, onward and upward to item number 4.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, item 4 will be presented by the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau and is entitled Partitioning, Disaggregation, and Leasing of Spectrum. Donald Stockdale, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And as the floor clears out, I feel compelled to tell you, Mr. Stockdale, that you should not view the relative paucity of attendees as a commentary on the importance of this issue. Rather, is the confidence they have that you and your able staff are handling this with aplomb that enables them to depart with confidence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very much assured. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I am pleased to present to you the Partitioning and Disaggregation Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. I'm joined at the table by Roger Noel, Lloyd Coward, and Jessica Griffinius of the Wireless Bureau. In addition to the staff at the table, I would like to thank the Commission staff listed on the slide for their input. Jessica will present the item. Jessica?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good morning.
We present today a notice of proposed rulemaking that would explore potential changes to the Commission's partitioning, disaggregation, and spectrum leasing rules to further the Commission's goals of closing the digital divide and increasing spectrum access by small and rural carriers. The NPRM would also satisfy the requirement under the Mobile Now Act that the Commission initiate a rulemaking to consider specific questions about how partitioning, disaggregation, and spectrum leasing could promote the availability of advanced telecommunications services in rural areas and increase spectrum access by small carriers. The NPRM would also seek comment on specific questions set forth in the Mobile Now Act. Whether a change to performance requirements applicable to partitioned or disaggregated licenses would promote the availability of advanced telecommunication services in rural areas or spectrum availability for small carriers. What conditions may be needed to eliminate impediments to transfers of spectrum to small carriers to allow them to build out spectrum in a reasonable period of time, And what incentives might encourage licensees to lease and sell spectrum to small carriers or unaffiliated carriers that will serve rural areas? With respect to specific incentives to further the Commission's dual goals, the NPRM would seek comment on whether to provide a party receiving partitioned or disaggregated spectrum with additional time to meet performance obligations under certain circumstances, and whether allowing reaggregation of spectrum that has been partitioned or disaggregated up to the size of the original market area would increase parties' incentives to lease or sell spectrum in the first place. The NPRM would develop a record on whether the Commission's existing partition, disaggregation, and spectrum leasing rules, which are designed to facilitate access to spectrum and encourage secondary market transactions that will lead to efficient use of spectrum, have succeeded. It would seek comment on whether further action could build upon and improve these existing secondary market tools to promote both Congress's and the Commission's goals. The Wireless Telecommunications Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges to make technical or conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Griffenes, for a compelling presentation. We'll now turn to comments from the bench, beginning with Commissioner O'Reilly.
I'm going to submit my statement for the record, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Carr?
You are not so lucky in this case.
Saturday
This
mornings?
is a long one. Strap in. A few months ago, I had the chance to meet Whitney from Lambert, Montana. Her family runs a farming and ranching operation in the northeast corner of Big Sky Country. The area is famous for being the farthest place in the country from a Starbucks. It's about, thanks for the one laugh, it's about 190 miles to the closest green-aproned barista, which is one reason why I won't be moving there anytime soon. A run to the grocery store is a 100-mile drive round trip. The nearest big city, Billings, is 5.5 hours away. Yet Whitney is an Instagram star. She makes money by using her smartphone to produce and upload what have become viral videos. She calls one of her more famous videos CrossFit for Cows. It's the finishing touch to that. It's been viewed actually 1 million times, 1,000,001. We can update that. It shows Ghost, as you saw, one of her 1,200-pound Herefords rolling a straw bale across a snow-covered field. Now, Whitney can get 4G LTE when she's in the field because there's a cell tower not far away that was put up to cover a highway that runs through the area. But there are still too many people in rural America that can't get a 4G LTE signal. And that's why the FCC is working on a number of fronts to help close this digital divide. We've allocated up to $4.5 billion to bring 4G LTE to more Americans. We've streamlined broadband infrastructure rules, and we've sought comment on expanding the FCC's existing geographic coverage requirements. Today, we tee up another option for increasing wireless service in rural America. As required by Congress in the Mobile Now Act, we seek comment on how our spectrum leasing and related rules can help promote wireless deployment in areas that might otherwise go unserved. Now, everyone may not have the same social media skills as Whitney or access to 1,200-pound Herefords, but they should at least have the same opportunity at next-generation connectivity. So I support today's notice, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on these important issues.
Thank you, Commissioner, for not giving us those seconds of our lives back. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
It's very hard to follow cows doing CrossFit. All right, in 2015, Senator Klobuchar and Senator Fisher introduced bipartisan legislation to improve universal service by extending the reach of wireless broadband in rural communities. And they proposed to do this by providing incentives for wireless carriers to partition, disaggregate, and lease unused spectrum to smaller carriers serving rural areas. This rulemaking builds on that initial proposal, which was featured in appropriations legislation from last year. To this effort, I offer my full support. I also offer my optimism That's because at its core, universal service is the principle that no matter who you are or where you live, you need access to modern communications to have a fair shot at 21st century success. This is a sacred responsibility under the law. But we all know that the tools this agency is using have not been sufficient to get the job done. Millions of Americans still lack access to affordable broadband, especially in rural communities. So it's a positive step that through this proceeding, we evolve our thinking about universal service and recognize that spectrum policy tools can help bring advanced communications to rural areas. Now here's the next step we should take if we want this to be truly successful. The partitioning, disaggregating, and leasing contemplated here will work better if our secondary markets can operate with full information. Today, the place to go for information about who owns spectrum and who might sell or lease it is our universal licensing system. But this database is opaque. It's not user-friendly. Moreover, it will only grow more complex and harder to use as we divide and divvy up licenses as contemplated here. So I believe as we move forward with this proceeding, we need in parallel a proceeding that will improve this database and increase the transparency of spectrum ownership. I hope my colleagues agree, and I look forward to making it happen.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 weeks ago, on my first visit outside the Beltway as an FCC commissioner, I traveled back home to Kansas City, along with Congressman Emanuel Cleaver, who represents Missouri's 5th District. We were eager to learn more about the work being done on the ground there to help close the digital divide in Kansas City and how we in Washington could help facilitate, support, and amplify those efforts. Among my many stops, I attended a meeting of the Kansas City Coalition for the Digital Inclusion, which is a group formed for the singular purpose of addressing the digital divide in Kansas City. It's comprised of representatives from nonprofits, government entities, businesses, and other individuals focused on fostering internet access and digital readiness in the greater Kansas City area. Missouri ranks 41st in the United States in connectivity and internet access, so it is abundantly clear that when it comes to ensuring that every American can benefit from the transformative power of robust and affordable broadband, we have our work cut out for us, both in Missouri and across the nation. To that end, I welcome any and all ideas that show promise in helping us bridge the digital divide, and I'm pleased to offer my support to today's item, which fulfills Congress's directive in the Mobile Now Act and explores how potential changes to the Commission's partitioning, disaggregation, and leasing rules would increase small carriers' access to spectrum, expand the availability of broadband in rural areas, and advance our collective goal of closing that digital divide. So I do look forward to reviewing the record that develops here and in this proceeding, and would challenge our stakeholders to put forward their best and most innovative ideas. Thank you for your work on this item.
Thank you, Commissioner. The recent Netflix series, Tidying Up with Marie Kondo, has launched a phenomenon as Americans embrace Marie's special way of keeping a tidy home. A key to her method is effectively managing your possessions by keeping only those that spark joy. Well, for the FCC, spectrum that is being put to productive use sparks joy. Spectrum that lies fallow does not. And that is why we allow license holders to partition, disaggregate, or lease spectrum so that more of it can be more easily used. And to ensure that we do that as effectively as possible, today's notice tees up many questions regarding the FCC's partitioning and disaggregation rules, which allow a spectrum license to be broken up into smaller pieces, as well as our leasing rules. We're aiming to figure out whether any changes to those rules would help small carriers get better access to spectrum, such as by encouraging spectrum licensees to sell or lease spectrum to small carriers serving rural areas. Additionally, in order to fulfill our obligations under the Mobile Now Act, we seek comment on whether a change to performance requirements could help rural telecom services and smaller providers. And we're also looking at how re-aggregating previously separated licenses might encourage the deployment of additional services. In short, we want to explore ways to improve wireless access in parts of this country, and I've seen many of them, that too often are on the wrong side of the digital divide. I'm looking forward to reviewing the record on these questions to find the appropriate way forward. And, of course, I do hope that the results spark joy. Many thanks to the staff that worked on this item from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, the Office of Economics and Analytics, the Office of Communications Business Opportunities, and the Office of General Counsel for the terrific work. We'll now proceed to a vote. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Aye.
Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
The chair votes to approve as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks for the great work. Madam Secretary, could you please take us to the piece de resistance of today's agenda?
Gladly. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, your final item, entitled Rule Call Completion, will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau, and Chris Monteith, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and Chief Monteith, or KMO, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Just getting in the morning, so I can continue to say good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Wireline Competition Bureau presents for your consideration a report and order that, if adopted, will complete the Commission's implementation of the Improving Rural Call Quality and Reliability Act of 2017, known as the RCC Act, which was enacted by Congress to address persistent rural call completion issues. The item reflects the combined efforts of many across the agency. In addition to thanking the entire Wireline Competition Bureau team for their hard work on this item, I also want to thank our colleagues in the Enforcement Bureau and in the Offices of Economics and Analytics and General Counsel for their review and helpful feedback. Seated at the table with me from the Wireline Competition Bureau and the Competition Policy Division are Dewana Terry, Associate Bureau Chief, Pam Arluck, Division Chief, and Zach Ross, Attorney Advisor. Zach will now present the item.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Morning.
The item before you continues the Commission's efforts to ensure that calls are indeed completed to all American consumers by taking significant steps to combat failed long-distance calls to rural America. Pursuant to the RCC Act, the report and order establishes service quality standards for intermediate providers, the entities that carry but do not originate or terminate voice calls. First, the order would require intermediate providers to take steps reasonably calculated to ensure that any calls they handle are in fact completed. Where intermediate providers know or should know of a call completion issue, they must act to address it. Second, when routing calls to rural areas, the order requires intermediate providers to actively monitor the performance of any other directly contracted intermediate provider and, based on the results of that monitoring, take steps to address any identified performance issues with that provider. Third, the order would require intermediate providers to ensure that any additional intermediate providers to which they hand off calls are registered with the Commission. As directed by the RCC Act, the order also provides an exception to the new service quality standards for intermediate providers that qualify for the safe harbor in the Commission's existing rules for covered providers, the providers that select the initial path of a long-distance call. To ensure a smooth transition to these new service quality standards, the order sunsets the Commission's existing call data recording and retention rules for covered providers 1 year after the new standards become effective. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges extending only to technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ross, for your presentation. We'll now turn to comments from the bench. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank the chair. I want to submit my statement for the record.
Okay, Commissioner Carr.
Just get started here. This decision is about a very straightforward, though long-winded, principle. When you make a phone call, whether to catch up with a friend or to call for help in an emergency, the call should go through. But for too many Americans living in rural and remote areas, this isn't always the case. The calls just don't go through. They hear a false busy signal, or they don't hear anything on the other end of the line. Often, the problem can be traced back to what are known in the telecom industry as intermediate providers. Last year, Congress stepped in by giving the FCC additional authority and directing the agency to adopt service quality standards that apply to these intermediate providers. We do that with today's order. Intermediate providers will now have an obligation to take action and ensure that calls are completed. This will help ensure that everyone in the country has access to quality telecom services. So I want to thank the staff of the Wireline Bureau for your work on the item. It has my support.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Communications requires trust. When you pick up the phone to place a call, you should have every confidence that your call will go through. But in too many places in rural America, that is not happening. Calls to family and friends will ring and ring and ring without ever being answered. Business connections will never get made. And worse, calls to public safety may not go through. For too long, consumers in rural America and the carriers that serve them have complained about this problem. And over the last few years, the FCC has answered their call, putting in place new policies to improve call completion. But still, this problem persists. So Congress sought to help when it passed the Rural Call Quality and Reliability Act, and under this law, last year the FCC adopted an intermediate carrier registry to improve call path transparency. And now, pursuant to the same legislation, we are establishing service quality standards. They include a general duty to complete calls and monitor carriers responsible for call transfer and completion. And I support the broad outlines of this effort. But let's be honest, the service quality standards we adopt today are weak tea. They lack the kind of objective criteria that make it easy to identify when problems arise. Because I would have preferred to put clearer rules of the road in place, I will concur in part. I also believe that going forward, we need to be especially vigilant because the only acceptable outcome is putting an end to this problem and restoring trust.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Starks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We all depend on the phone network working. We may not know exactly how our call gets from one point to another, but we assume that when we make a call, it will reach the party that we're calling. But for the last decade or so, that assumption did not always ring true for some calls to rural areas. And it's not because of technological difficulties, it's because a company in the call path tried to save money by demoting and in some cases disposing of calls to rural areas rather than paying the cost to complete them. This is unacceptable. Calls to rural areas are just as important as every other call. They could be to a child's school, or to check in with family members, or to a hospital, or to a fire or police department. And if we can't rely on them going through, it raises serious public safety concerns. The Commission has wrestled with rural call completion issues for years. And there have been the allegations for years that intermediate carriers are avoiding paying the charges at issue here by gaming the system or simply dumping traffic altogether. In this case, calls never complete. And in the very worst cases, a fake ring signal gets sent back to the caller so that they think a call went through, but it really didn't. And the Commission has repeatedly reminded carriers that they have a duty to complete these calls and that they are responsible for the actions of their agents, including intermediate carriers. But the rural call completion problems continued. Then the FCC began to actively enforce this issue, entering into 6 consent decrees with carriers large and small since 2013, including a $40 million settlement with a major carrier just last year. But the rural call completion problems continued. And the problem has grown so bad that there were calls for Congress to pass legislation, and they did. One of the most vexing parts of the problem was how to reach these intermediate providers that only handle traffic in the middle of a call. And I know from my time in the Enforcement Bureau that this is tricky stuff. Identifying the carrier responsible for actually throwing a call overboard can be like chasing ghosts. Fortunately, in 2017, Congress gave the Commission new and powerful tools and authority to stop this problem. And the FCC now has the power to make intermediate providers, a notoriously hard-to-pin-down group, identify themselves by registering with the Commission. Congress also required the FCC to develop the service quality standards for intermediate providers that we address here today. By these actions, Congress brought intermediate providers, including those who are not otherwise regulated as voice carriers, within the Commission's jurisdiction for the first time. And as someone who has worked firsthand on these issues, I was happy to see Congress take these actions because the Commission has previously and specifically identified these intermediate providers in the call path as contributing to the roll call completion problem. The plan was that the registration requirement and the Commission-designed service quality standards would fix the problem. So I, as well, was disappointed to see that the product of this Commission's year-long effort to create service quality standards was weak tea. We essentially tell them, complete these calls and keep an eye on each other. And remember, we have had such difficulty pinning down this group of intermediate providers that Congress had to step in. So while I appreciate the hard work of the staff, and I've worked with the chief when I was in my enforcement capacity on policing this area, I do believe that the report and order today misses a genuine opportunity to ensure that we can stamp out these intermediate providers who don't complete calls by applying some well-grounded standards by which we'd be able to measure their behavior and adopt some specific means to hold them accountable. I fear that the order does not do enough to fix roll call completion problems that stem from these intermediate providers. The registry is not up and running yet, so we don't fully understand the universe of these intermediate providers, but we're going to find out. And nothing in the Commission's experience or this order indicates that intermediate providers have the capability to monitor rural call completion performance of other intermediate providers. But we're going to find out. And the language in the order limiting intermediate provider obligations to the use of quote-unquote tools available and to using quote-unquote commercially reasonable efforts to alert end quote other intermediate providers is also concerning. To me, these smell like loopholes that will be irresistible to this notoriously hard to pin down group. But we will find out. The bottom line is I won't be surprised if we're right back here at some point down the road discussing how to improve the intermediate provider service quality standards to ultimately stop rural call completion problems. And in that light, I'm pleased that the chairman and my fellow commissioners accepted my suggestion to seek comment in 1 year on how the intermediate provider service quality standards are working out and whether rural call completion problems have in fact improved. I know that WCB and the Enforcement Bureau have been hard at work at this issue for years, and thank you for your efforts.
Thank you, Commissioner. In 2019, every American should be able to rely on a telephone system that works. But for those living in rural or remote parts of the country, that is still not always the case. Calls to these areas can get dropped, or they can result in dead air or false busy signals, or an erroneous message that the number you have dialed is not in service. Well, these rural call completion problems can have costly repercussions for friends and relatives trying to connect with loved ones, for small businesses trying to retain customers, and for residents in distress trying to reach public safety officials. This is simply unacceptable. As former Iowa Congressman David Young, one of the congressional sponsors of rural call completion legislation, put it, families in rural America should not be disadvantaged because of where they live. Businesses in rural states should have the same communication access to conduct daily business as those in urban areas. And improving rural call completion is critical to ensuring the survival of small towns and granting Americans the choice to live and thrive in whatever community is best for them, rural, urban, or anywhere in between. Well, I couldn't agree more with this sentiment, and that is why today we continue our efforts to tackle rural call completion problems by taking new steps to implement the Improving Rural Call Quality and Reliability Act of 2017. Specifically, we adopt service quality standards for intermediate providers, these middlemen carriers that take calls from the originating carrier and send them toward the terminating carrier. And as Commissioner Starks pointed out, they can be the source of rural call completion problems. Well, first, we require intermediate providers to take steps reasonably calculated to ensure that any calls they handle are in fact completed. When intermediate providers know or should know of a call completion problem, they must now act to address it. Second, when intermediate providers route calls to rural areas, they must actively monitor the performance of any intermediate provider with which they contract. And based on the results of that monitoring, they must take steps to address any identified performance issues with that provider. Third, we require intermediate providers to ensure that any additional intermediate providers to which they hand off calls are registered with the FCC. In today's order, we also sunset the FCC's call data recording and retention rules for originating carriers, known as covered providers, 1 year after the new service quality standards become effective. Now, sunsetting these outdated rules will allow covered providers to focus on complying with the monitoring and other requirements we adopted last year, rather than continuing to collect and retain data that has proven to be of little use in resolving rural call completion problems. Together, these changes should help achieve Congress's goal of ensuring that the telephone system has integrity for all customers in the United States. And for their outstanding work on behalf of rural consumers, I would like to thank the following Commission staff: Pam Arlick, Allison Baker, Alex Espinoza, Justin Falb, Heather Hendrickson, Chris Monteith, Zachary Ross, and Duana Terry of the Wireline Competition Bureau, Rizwan Chowdhury, Margaret Daly, Robert Krinsky, Callan Lee, and Amr Zain of the Enforcement Bureau, Melina Barzilai, Ashley Boisel, Tom Johnson, Rick Mallon, and Linda Oliver of the Office of General Counsel, and Eric Berger, Joe Calishone, Julia McHenry, Chuck Needy, and Eric Ralph of the Office of Economics and Analytics. Thanks for the great work on this issue. We'll now proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
Commissioner Carr?
Approve.
Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Approve in part, concur in part.
Commissioner Starks?
Approve in part, concur in part.
The chair votes to approve. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Thanks to the staff for the great work. Are there any announcements at this time? Commissioner O'Reilly.
Just a brief one, and that's to say that this month we welcome Joel Miller to Team O'Reilly, our new Chief of Staff and Media Legal Advisor and Press Contact. Mr. Miller has an extensive resume on communications issues and past worked for Congressman Brett Guthrie from Kentucky, from where I stole him. Joel's been here a few weeks and getting to know the building, and I appreciate everyone's warmly greeting him, and much to come in the future from Mr. Miller. So I thank you.
Well, only if he stands up.
No. See, that's a difference. We don't do that in our office.
I crossed that line once. That's true. He doesn't want to.
Anybody? Commissioner Starks?
I do as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are, to use a golf term, we're laying in week 6 here. So it's been 6 weeks on the job here for Team Starks, and I am proud to say we have had our first births, our first babies for the Starks Commissionership.
Plural. All right.
Yes, plural. I am pleased to announce that Natalie Martinez, who was serving as my acting staff assistant, gave birth on February the 28th to twin boys, Dominic Antonio and Donovan Enrique. To the AV folks, we have, here they are. As folks may know, I'm a twin myself, a twin boy. And so I have a real soft spot for these boys, and I am rooting for them. But in particular, I was a baby B. I am 6 minutes behind my older twin brother. And so Donovan is baby B. I understand he is the bigger of the two. And so I am rooting for baby B, Donovan. But congratulations to Natalie, her family, everyone is at home. And on a related note, with Natalie's blessed event, we've had to reach out to help fill her shoes. I'd like to thank Desmond Matthews of the Enforcement Bureau and Alex Hernandez of CBG for agreeing to help us in our time of need. And thank you, of course, to their bureau chiefs for letting us borrow them. Welcome aboard.
Thank you, Commissioner Starks. A few announcements on my end, both departures and arrivals. First, in terms of departures, Lori Alexiou, my confidential assistant, has returned to the Office of General Counsel. I want to thank her for her fantastic work over the last several years. She had a challenging job, lost receipts, misplaced IDs, unruly calendar, Reese's wrappers all around my desk, but somehow she navigated this thicket of chaos and provided a sense of order to me and to all of the office. So I very much much want to thank her for her service to OCH and to the Commission, and look forward to continuing to work with her in her new capacity. Stepping into her shoes, wondering probably what she has signed up for, is Andy Rowan as the new acting confidential assistant. She is the Wilmington's finest. She's already given me great recommendations on the superiority of Delaware and its underappreciation in the Northeast Corridor. She has been fantastic to work with as well, and thank you, Andy, for stepping into the breach as well. Deanne Irwin is stepping into Andy's shoes, supporting two very interesting members of the Commission staff, Matthew Berry and Nick Degani. I have confirmed with our General Counsel's office that the Eighth Amendment does not apply to the Chairman's office, so I wish Deanne well in her new capacity. Monica Alexander as well is standing in for Deanne, and Monica has been, she's now an executive assistant in our office. She's been at the FCC almost 18 years, which is remarkable considering that she's only 29. She's on loan from the auctions division. She spent many years in the wireless telecommunication bureau front office, so thank you, Monica, for your service. Also want to thank Justin Fall. We also had a birth recently in our office. Mr. Preston Wise, our special counsel, gave birth. Wait, he didn't give birth, sorry. That would be Spectrum Horizons. No, so he and his wife had a new baby, and so Justin stepped in, and we want to thank him for his work in OCH. Preston has returned. A little grayer, a little more tired, but we're happy he's back as well. Also, last but not least, Alex Sangenis, who is here. He currently serves as a legal advisor for media issues, replacing the August Allison Steger in our office. He previously served in the Media Bureau as a legal advisor in the front office, as well as a staff attorney in the Media Bureau's audio division, where he focused on a wide range of broadcast issues, including significantly the licensing of translator, NCE, and low-power FM stations. Mr. Sangenis graduated from the U, as I understand they call it. Yes, exactly. You and Michael Irvin, well done. The University of Miami School of Law. He earned his LLM from the American University Washington College of Law and got his undergrad degree from the school that lost to Villanova in 1985, Georgetown University. He is a huge fan of coffee, which of course serves him well in our office. Unlike me, significantly though, he is a big runner. If you look at his office, he has a lot of pictures of running, and he expressed disappointment during the upcoming NAB show that I would not be able to join him for 5 a.m. runs on the Strip in Las Vegas. I'll certainly be with him in spirit, if nothing else. If nothing else, if my colleagues don't have anything else, we will now turn to the Secretary to announce the date of the next Open Commission meeting.
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Friday, April 12th, 2019.
With that, I would urge you to beware the Ides of March and have a good day.
Please be seated. We're going to get started with the open meeting press conference with the chairman. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Chairman Pye.
Thank you, Tina. Friends, Reuters, TR Daily, lend me your ears. No, if you think a Shakespeare Ides of March reference is a new low for nerdy illusions here at the Commission, just think if this meeting had been held as traditionally has been the case on Thursday, March 14th, and we had all of the iterations of pie jokes to make. So just be grateful that we're doing it today on March 15th. Anyway, setting aside all the calendar tie-ins, if there were a theme to this month's featured items, it might be the Jeffersons, because we are moving on up. First, we are moving up the spectrum chart, taking ultra-high band frequencies long considered useless for real-world applications, and we're opening them up for wireless services and technologies. Specifically, the Spectrum Horizons order that we just approved unanimously will make a massive 21.2 gigahertz of spectrum above 95 gigahertz available for unlicensed use across 4 frequency bands. And in addition to that, we also created a new experimental license category that will permit experimental use on any frequency from 95 gigahertz all the way up to 3 terahertz with no limits on geography or technology. And so in plain terms, what the Commission just did was to create a big sandbox for engineers and technologists to work with, including Professor Rappaport from NYU's Tandon School, who you heard earlier this morning. And we look forward to seeing what American ingenuity delivers through their experiments in this sandbox. Our action today is a critical step towards maintaining America's leadership in wireless innovation. Second, we're moving up from the ground floor when it comes to our ability to locate those calling 911 from wireless phones. If you were to call 911 from a wireless phone right now, your provider is required to transmit your horizontal location to the call center. The first responders would know what building you're in, but they wouldn't know what floor you are on. And so the FCC just voted to advance a proposal that would require wireless companies to transmit the vertical location of 911 calls within 3 meters, or about 10 feet, above or below the phone for most calls. Now, in most cases, this 3-meter standard would be precise enough to identify the floor level of an indoor 911 caller, even if you call from a deluxe apartment in the sky. So I look forward to working with public safety experts and other stakeholders to finalize a benchmark for identifying the vertical location of 911 calls, which will improve response times for calls that come from tall buildings and ultimately save lives. This is a groundbreaking FCC proposal, and we look very much forward to promoting this critical Commission priority of public safety. With that, I would be happy to take your questions.
Monty Taylor, ComDaily. Chairman Pai, in the order she issued getting rid of the HGO proceeding, Judge Halpern said that the issues of candor raised in the HBO for Sinclair Tribune might be addressed in a future proceeding. Is the FCC obligated to hold a future proceeding if Sinclair changes its licenses or transfers them or renews them? Is it possible that Sinclair could sell or renew a license without triggering a future proceeding?
That is a question that would lie within, as a first instance, within the jurisdiction of the Media Bureau and the Office of General Counsel, and so I would refer you to them.
You're pretty knowledgeable about their kind of thing, though.
This is true, but nonetheless, I would defer to our terrific experts in those two entities for comment on that particular question.
Okay, I'll ask them.
McGill with Politico. Ahead of the start of the 24 gigahertz auction this week, there was public concern from both lawmakers and from federal agencies about the potential for wireless signals to interfere with federal satellites like those that are used for weather observation. Those fears all came out ahead of the auction, so I'm wondering, are you concerned that some of those concerns could perhaps undermine wireless providers' confidence in using that spectrum for 5G or possibly affect bidding in the auction or just use of the band in general for 5G?
I'm not going to comment on anything having to do with the auction since it is still pending, but what I will say is that we always look forward to working with our federal partners and other interested stakeholders on the technical studies and other necessary steps to create a new opportunity for America to lead in 5G, and that is precisely what we did in the context of the 24 gigahertz band.
60. I saw you guys got a shout out on the John Oliver show recently, and I was wondering if you agree with the characterization on what the FCC is doing for robocalls, and additionally if the FCC is still getting calls from the show.
I didn't watch the segment, so I can't express an opinion. But from day one, attacking illegal robocalls has been the Commission's top consumer protection priority. And that is why for many months we have introduced various initiatives to attack the problem. For example, allowing phone companies to block calls that are obviously from fake numbers, for example, area codes that don't exist. Demanding that the phone carriers adopt call authentication, essentially digital fingerprint for every phone call this year, with the threat of FCC regulatory action lying on top of it. Extending the reach of our authority through recent authority granted by Congress to attack illegal robocalls coming from abroad. Working with foreign counterparts, for example, the chairman of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, with whom I recently discussed this issue in the last month. Stepping up our enforcement efforts, the largest fines in the FCC's 85-year history have been imposed on robocallers under my leadership against individuals who unleashed a massive amount of these on American consumers. And so both from the regulatory and the enforcement perspective, we are showing in word and deed that this is our top consumer protection priority. And so we look forward to helping consumers attack this scourge, and we stand four square behind them.
Hi, Chairman. Casey Egan, S&P Global. I want to ask about the first item on today's agenda, opening up ultra-high band spectrum for experimentation. Can you talk a little bit about the impetus behind your decision to put it on the agenda? Like, was there a strong appetite from groups and organizations to pushing for that spectrum to become more available?
I think there have been a number of advocates over the years who have encouraged us to think very broadly about spectrum policy, some who used to work here, some who are here now. And just use the example of Professor Rappaport. I met with him about a year ago, I think it was, and we were just discussing about some of these new frontiers, and he made the point that he made here today, that a generation ago you would have been laughed out of the room if you had suggested that millimeter wave spectrum could have any practical application in the real world. And he teed up the idea of, well, spectrum above 95 gigahertz is important too, and we discussed the preceding that we were bringing to fruition here today. And I think one of the reasons why it was important to me, to all of us, speaking as a unanimous commission today, to really open up 21 gigahertz of spectrum for unlicensed innovation is precisely that we don't know where this ingenuity will take us. That's the lesson that we've had in the past from unlicensed innovations like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and the like, is that sort of to invoke Kevin Costner in The Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. If you set the sandbox of innovation in place, there's no telling what engineers and technologists and entrepreneurs might be able to do with it in terms of delivering future benefits to consumers. And I think Professor Rappaport's presentation was great on giving us a glimpse of what that future might bring. I mean, the notion, I don't understand the math, of course, but the concept of wireless speeds that act at the rate of human cognition, I can't remember the exact quote he used, but that's the kind of thing that could be on tap. And so we want to see where things go, and we're really excited about working with academics like him and folks in the private sector to make those potentials a reality.
John Reed, Bloomberg Law. As you know, there's a lot of interest in the C-band from the industry and now on Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
Do you have any updates? Do you expect a decision to be made within the next few months?
No particular updates other than we continue to meet with interested stakeholders on this issue on all sides. And so working with commissioners, the career staff, and those stakeholders, we will continue to examine those issues that are pending in that proceeding.
Hi, my name's Toby and I'm a policy tracker. There are a lot of things that the Spectrum Horizons NPRM didn't look at, like having the licenses and dealing with the safety issues, which is important for companies finding insurance for these applications. Some of the rules around spectroscopy and all those kind of things. Was the Horizons NPRM a bit rushed just to get it out quickly? Or, if you'd like to comment on the amount of things that still need to be done on this one.
No, to the contrary. I mean, this report and order came at the end of a process that I think has taken perhaps a year and a half, 2 years. I can't recall exactly what date we kicked off this proceeding, but it's been a long period of time, and that's in part due to the recognition that this is a very complex issue. As you heard from Professor Rappaport's presentation, the bands that we're talking about don't necessarily behave as the bands below 6 gigahertz do, and so, or even as millimeter wave bands do. And so we had to sort through a lot of very complicated engineering issues. But certainly going forward, I mean, we always look forward to working to make sure that our decisions are fully informed by sound engineering, sound economic analysis, and sound legal principles.
Howard Besker, Communications Daily. So on the E911 calling issue, a lot of public safety guys though have really deep concerns about the 3 meters, and I think the concern is, so somebody's calling from the 4th floor, and that's 10 feet. Are they down on the 3rd or are they up on the 5th? And in a building like this, they could, it's already hard to find callers. Do you perceive that this is something that can be addressed down the road? I mean, do you have those concerns?
Well, 2 different points. I mean, one, I think the public safety community has been extremely supportive of our efforts to target a vertical location accuracy standard that can help first responders do their jobs. And that's exactly the reason why you heard in my statement and the statement of others from this dais that when industry initially came with a 5-meter standard, we said, no, we need to go back to the drawing board and figure out what the limits of technical feasibility are. And we determined, based on a very careful analysis of the record, that a 3-meter standard was appropriate. But to the extent that there were such concerns, we incorporated into the item, and you'll see it as soon as it's released, that we wanted to seek public input on whether there's another standard that would be workable. And that's the entire point of a notice of proposed rulemaking. We don't say that this is the way it's going to be regardless of what the public input is. We say instead, we propose A, we want to take note of B, and see where things go from there. And so that's the reason why the Administrative Procedure Act establishes this process for the FCC, why the FCC takes seriously the public input that comes through that process.
Yeah, Dave Cal, Communications Daily. Your focus on combating waste, fraud, and abuse in the Lifeline program is well known. But as the national verifier rolls out, it does appear that significant numbers of eligible low-income consumers are at risk of being de-enrolled or prevented from enrolling because of complexities in the system and shortcomings in terms of access to key databases and other problems. USAC is working through this, and they appear to be some improvements on the horizon. But some of the things apparently need FCC direction. And also some of these improvements will take time. So my question for you is, are you considering any changes in how the national verifier is operating? Specifically, take a second look at some of the rural states that were not connected to key databases and caused very high failure rates. Also, potentially pausing de-enrollments until you get the systems fixed, or pausing the hard launches in national verifier until you get these things fixed.
So those sub-questions are obviously pretty meaty ones in and of themselves, but I will say at a higher level is this. If any rural state, South Dakota, Kansas, any of these states, want to pursue an automated connection with us in order to support the national verifier, then we are more than happy to work with them. When it comes from de-enrollments, our goal, of course, is to make sure that all existing eligible Lifeline subscribers transition to the national verifier, as we transition to the national verifier, remain in the program. And otherwise, we are working actively with all stakeholders, with private sector, with the trade associations, with state government officials and others to ensure that this new national verifier is stood up in a way that guards against waste, fraud, and abuse and delivers on our fundamental priority of making sure, as I've said from day one, going to the previous administration, that every dollar that is dispensed through this program goes to somebody who needs the help. I mean, that is the ultimate promise of the Lifeline program, and that is a promise that we are determined to deliver on.
Anyway, Chairman Pai, Jonathan from Communications Daily, could you just talk about your interpretation about whether the robocalls that John Oliver initiated are legal, under the TCPA? And then also more substantively, you talked about, enforcement regulatory actions that the Commission has taken under you. Are there more that we can expect? What more can we expect in terms of regulatory actions, things to come on TCPA?
On the first question, I would defer to our Office of General Counsel for any explanation of that. On the second point, I mean, I can't comment on pending enforcement activities, of course, but what I will say is that we are constantly monitoring these situations and ensuring that consumers are protected by aggressively pursuing enforcement action if and when possible. And that's part of the reason why you've seen some of these cases, including cases presented at open commission meetings, which traditionally has not been done, because we recognize and we want the robocallers to recognize that this agency is a very active cop on the beat, and we are not going to stop or sit still until we attack what Fritz Hollings rightfully called many years ago the scourge of civilization.
Just a clarification, I had actually asked about if you expected any regulatory. I understand you can't.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were talking enforcement.
So what's the pipeline, TCPA actions? Obviously, there are a couple things that will be coming at one point. Can you just go over what those are?
Yeah, no particular forecast on any of the potential regulatory initiatives we might have coming in the future, except to say that we are always looking for a way, as recent commission meetings have shown, to exercise the authority that has been given to us by Congress to vigorously protect consumers. And the most recent one from last month or 2 months ago, I can forget which, in terms of applying the authority that Congress gave us over illegal robocalls that come from abroad, that's a good example of the fact that the FCC's leadership and its career staff stand willing and able to be at the vanguard for protecting consumers.
Thank you. And at this point, I'll invite Mark Wigfield up for the Bureau press conference. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, let's just go through bureau by bureau. Are there any questions on Spectrum Horizons? Okay, Wireless Bureau, please. Or I'm sorry, OET.
Julie? Yep.
Yeah, Howard Beskirk with Communications Daily. So there were a lot of questions that we were hearing about footnote US 246 and and all the spectrum that's sort of set aside to protect passive services, and I don't think the order mentions the footnote specifically, but I just wondered if you can have there been any changes made to the orders since it got to the 8th floor? I mean, or does it address it at all in sort of a way that we might be missing?
No, I don't think there's anything on that point from the draft that went out. Unless I miss something.
I mean, is that a concern? All the passive, the broad protections for like 10 passive bands.
So it also stems from an international footnote that we're obliged to protect. Bear in mind, everything in this region of the spectrum is brand new, and we'll see where things evolve eventually.
Thank you.
Any further comments, questions? Okay, thank you. The next item is the public safety item, E911 location accuracy. Are there questions on that item, Kelsey? Okay, public safety?
Hi, Kelsey Griffiths with Law 360. I was wondering if you could give us a little more information about the economic analysis questions that were added that I think Commissioner O'Reilly mentioned.
The item will be out as soon as possible, and I would refer you to the further notice.
Okay, I'm going to ask a different question, which probably will result in the same, produce the same result. But can you at least confirm that that it adds questions about privacy, and I guess also about how to determine the force of the caller? I mean, I'm not asking for color on those questions, but does it add questions in both of those areas?
With respect to data privacy, as some of the commissioners mentioned, yes, it does include questions on that.
And on the caller for?
It adds that too. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Doesn't look like we're going to get any additional color on that today, so there won't be any color on that today.
Wait for the item.
Yep.
Anything further on this one? All right, thank you. Next item is the Media Bureau incentive auction reimbursements. Monty, okay.
Afternoon.
Thanks, guys. Monty Taylor, Com Daily. I was just wondering, T-Mobile met with a bunch of people over here asking for some specific language changes to that item, and I was wondering if any of that happened. Did they specifically asked about the line about stations getting to be reimbursed for costs that weren't covered by their third-party funders? Has that been made more prominent or changed at all?
There was a minor edit made to the item regarding that issue.
Okay, and were there any other substantive changes to the item?
No.
Okay, and then I also want to ask you about what I asked Chairman Pai. Is it possible for Sinclair to renew a license or transfer a license and not have a further proceeding on the issues raised in the HDO?
I think all I can say at this point is that, as the chairman said, we're reviewing the order from the ALJ in consultation with our Office of General Counsel.
Okay. Anything further on this one? All right, thank you. Then Wireless Bureau spectrum disaggregation. Are there questions on that item?
Thanks, Michelle.
Okay, there are not. And finally, the Wireline Competition Bureau roll call completion. Questions on that one? David? Okay.
Yeah, Commissioner Starks referenced seeking comment in year on how the intermediate provider service quality standards are working and whether roll call completion problems have improved. Is there anything else you can tell us about? Is that just open-ended, or is the Bureau expected to issue some sort of report or recommendation after that?
I don't believe that the order specifies. It's just that we will look at the issues again in a year.
So no actions, just look.
No.
Okay. And then secondly, some long-distance providers who hand off their traffic to overseas carriers had some concerns, and I understand you all may have addressed those in some way. Can you tell us what you did to address those, if you did?
The item will be released shortly, but let me just say that we responded to a number of ex partes, including that one.
What were the other ones you responded to?
Do you guys?
There were a couple ex parties at the end, like U.S. Telecom and NTCA and that one. But that one was.
But did you make
specifically
changes? Because U.S. Telecom and CTIA just wanted you to stick with what you were doing.
No, that one we did it. There is a clarification footnote in the item responding to that particular ex parte.
Okay. Were there any other changes made besides that and the additional comments that Commissioner Starks?
Nothing
Okay.
substantive.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Anything further on this one? All right, thank you very much. And the commissioners are now here for their portion of the press conference.
Well, hello, everyone. How are you today?
Well,
We'll start at this end, if that's okay.
Yeah, I would like both of you, if you could answer the question I asked the chairman. Do you think the commission is obligated to hold a further proceeding on the issues raised in the HDO if Sinclair tries to renew or transfers a license?
I think those are best asked to the chairman in the general counsel's office.
I did ask the chairman. He didn't answer. The Media Bureau didn't really answer either. You guys could break this
Well, you're
trend.
asking, you're asking me to interpret what they've put forward, and so you'd have to ask them on what they intend by that, by their language. I didn't work on crafting that.
You could take a stab at it.
I could
Commissioner
certainly-
Carr, do you also not want to answer?
Well, also, we say, we delegated this issue to the ALJ, to their expertise to decide, and they issued their decision, and I respect that decision. I honestly don't recall at this point what the procedures are. If there's an appeal from that to the commission, there may not be.
I'm not talking about an
Procedures are in front of
appeal, but the ALJ specifically said that if there's if Sinclair does something with their license, then other proceedings may be warranted. And I'm wondering if they are or they aren't.
If Sinclair does something with their
Like,
license,
yeah,
then-
transfers it or renews it.
Sure, yeah, there will be proceedings at that point to review the license transfer consistent with the statute that applies in all such license transfers.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Margaret McGill with Politico. There was some, I guess, disagreement among different parts of the government, Commerce and NASA, on rules for 24 gigahertz and what the U.S. should pursue internationally for that band. That came out in public ahead of the auction. I'm curious, do you think that some of this back and forth could undermine the U.S. as it seeks to set global standards for 24?
So I make no comment regarding the ongoing auction and set that aside. But I've been I've been displeased by the gamesmanship that's been had over the last couple of weeks on this issue. I think the issue was rightfully solved and resolved. I think that came through in the letter by NEC, but it should not have gotten to that point. This is something that was long ago resolved, and I think it was reopening in bad faith. So I'm disappointed that it came to those circumstances. I don't think it necessarily has to set us back as it relates to further negotiations and further conversations as it relates to work later this year. I think we have a strong agenda that we hopefully will be able to pursue in unleashing new wireless spectrum for future services, and I think that the entire government is going to be forward for that purpose. We'll still be respectful of all different viewpoints, but I'm hopefully we can put this behind us.
Thanks. Commissioner Carr?
Yeah, I'll just say, there's been a full and fair airing of different views on this proceeding. This particular band is one that's been under review and under works and under discussion for years at this point. I think you had an article that came out yesterday that said the White House has weighed in terms of the U.S.'s position and that the issue has been decided. And we're fully behind where everything came out with this particular proceeding and looking forward to going into the international conference on this issue.
Thanks.
Hi, Commissioners. Excuse me. I was wondering if either of you could comment on whether you're still getting robocalls from the Last Week Tonight show and whether you agree with the characterization in that show segment that the FCC wasn't really pressing carriers enough to handle robocalls.
Look, I can't answer the first part of your question. We were, and I don't know if we still are. I honestly haven't. I've been in and out with. I've been so sick and some other things, so I don't know the answer to whether it's still ongoing. I did see the piece. I didn't think much of it. I didn't find it funny, as I have in the past. I think the chairman has actually been very aggressive on the issue of illegal robocalls, and I think he's done yeoman's work on that. They've done worked as hard as anyone I know in trying to move forward on the technology side and also on the enforcement side. So I give them all due credit. I've been pushing forward to provide some clarity for those legal robocalls, and hopefully we'll be able to do that. And that's what I found was offensive in the piece, because it was this idea that Tom Wheeler's rules were the right thing to go, where the court struck it down because it actually doesn't meet the statute. Was actually the important factor for our job, and so I apologize, my viewpoints on this, but in my energy here. But for a comedian to say, oh, you should have ignored the law, and that should be the new standard, is not going to be what I'm going to do while I'm here in this job.
Yeah, I think it's not a partisan issue in any way. I've talked about this before. When I walk down the street in my neighborhood, literally people will throw their windows up and say, what are you doing about those robocalls? I personally, on my personal phone, have been and get robocalls. I've gotten them when I've been sitting on the dais. I mean, people are absolutely outraged about it, and rightly so. And that's why in 2017, we elevated robocalls to the top enforcement priority. We've taken a number of actions. It's a tough issue to solve. There's no two ways around that, but we are working really diligently through a number of work streams to solve it, and we're going to continue to do it. And it is okay that people are really upset about it and are airing those views. We feel the same way, but we are working really hard on the problem, and we're going to keep doing that.
Question for Commissioner O'Reilly. Just considering it's already March and the 24 gigahertz auction is underway, I'd just sort of like to hear your thoughts on the outlook for getting more mid-band into the marketplace this year.
Well, I think we're working really hard, and you have to talk to the chairman in terms of the agenda. I know we're scheduled to do the 37, 39, 47 auction in the second half of this year. That requires a lot of work. We're still in the preparatory stages for the auction for the CBRS band, for the PAL licenses. So I don't know when that timing will be. I kind of believe it's in my take, and it's not, again, the chairman's call, but I tend to believe it's going to go into 2020 in terms of the auction, in terms of how much we can handle at one time. I've talked about how many auctions we should be able to handle more than one. So, but the things being as they are, I'm not sure that we're going to get that auction at this time in this year, but hopefully it'll be expeditiously. In terms of the other big piece, which has been talked about, I've been leading the effort in terms of a lead advocate on C-band. I think there's a lot of difficult issues to decide. I think they can be decided, and I'd like to do them as quick as possible and resolve this so we can get it to market, because I think it's a real question of timing. It does matter for my purposes. It does matter for purposes of getting mid-band spectrum out for competing internationally. And then the third piece, which I think is the mid-band play, is 3.45, which I've talked about, and I believe there our federal partners, changed in the middle of the game, pulled the rug underneath, out from under us, and so hopefully we'll be able to put that back together at some point, and we'll just see where that goes.
I have separate questions for you guys. So, Commissioner O'Reilly, can you talk about the direction that the KidVid proceeding is taking? I know you've talked about it at NAB, but just some more details on that would be great. And then Commissioner Carr, how confident are you that the FCC will prevail in the small cell litigation that had its oral argument today at the D.C. Circuit?
So I think I've indicated, and things haven't changed since I last commented about this topic at NAB State Leadership Conference, but I had an opportunity during the government shutdown, since nobody was here, to read the record, hopefully put forward a path that I think that may resolve the different issues that have been raised, and I'm hopeful that in the next couple of months we'll be able to get someplace that most people can rally behind. I have to first prepare a document and talk to the chairman, make sure he's comfortable with it, and then have an opportunity to start to see if interested parties might be copacetic based on their viewpoints, and hopefully we'll do that in the near future and get to a point that resolves the issues, the goals of my original project, which were to, provide some, modernize our rules, provide some flexibility to broadcasters, and not cause harm to those children that are using and viewing this programming. There was a fourth goal that I had at the original time, and that was reduce the complexity of the rules, and I'm not sure that's going to go along. And as I read the record, it may become more complex to provide the flexibility and all the other things. But if that's the trade-off that I'm willing to make.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to listen to the oral argument yet, so I don't have any reaction to that. But I'll say, just based on the experience of running through the record, working through these issues, really confident in the decision that we issued. And in fact, we're already seeing really great results from that March of last year decision. Small cells have been going in at 6 times the pace as before. When I was recently in Barcelona for Mobile World Congress, a lot of regulators from around the world were pointing to a lot of these infrastructure decisions that we've made at the FCC as really sort of bounding the U.S. forward when it comes to deployment. So very confident in the decision that we issued.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Toby from Policy Tracker. Commissioner O'Reilly, you said in your statement about we shouldn't forget to license spectrum above 95 gigahertz in your statement on the Spectrum Horizons NPRM. I was wondering, should the FCC have waited before putting out this NPRM to tee up those issues? And there's some other issues as well that the Millimeter Wave Coalition was talking about to do with safety and
No, I was completely comfortable moving forward, and you saw that in my statement. I think that there was the bands that we identified for unlicensed were likely to be not viable for licensing, and so I think that's good to move forward, provide the certainty that Dr. Rappaport highlighted in terms of what, bring forward bands that will be able to use new technologies, and so I'm excited by that, and I don't think it precludes us from moving forward, and certainly we'll have to have licensed bands above 95 gigahertz, in my opinion.
Do you want to comment on that, Commissioner Carr?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Oh, it's about the Spectrum Horizons NPRM, and if it was too rushed in that it didn't address a lot of things like licensing spectrum above 95 gigahertz.
No, I don't think so. I mean, inside the FCC, we've been taking steps on 95 gigahertz as far back as 2014 in terms of including above 95 and additional rounds of commenting. I think we've probably gone through, if I'm remembering correctly, at least 2 or 3 rounds of comments on 95 in different proceedings. So I think the time is now to put it in this docket and get some feedback on it.
Okay. From what I understand, I mean, robocalling is a big issue, obviously, that you guys hear all about. And then after that, it's footnote US 246. That's what I've heard. But I'm not asking you to comment on that. Mike, there's been a lot of questions that have come up over the last couple days about, the passive bands in the high band spectrum and how much is protected there and how it's sort of a sledgehammer approach. And I'm just wondering, do either one of you have concerns about that? And is that something that can kind of be addressed down the road?
I think some of that got to Margaret's question, if I understood correctly. The passive bands issue that you're talking about is 24
right.
gigahertz issue.
What she was asking about in the context of the spectrum for auction, and I'm asking about in the context for there's like 10 bands above 95 gigahertz, right? So.
Right. We're going to have to review all those issues going forward. I think that we have had sound rules and agreements on passive bands and how much protection is going to be necessary. We're always open to examining factual studies that are presented, but it will not be based on just hearsay and anecdotal evidence. And so people haven't come forward with that to suggest that the protections we provided in the past are not sufficient, and therefore I haven't been comfortable in any capacity changing what we've already agreed upon.
And then I also wanted to ask, so with the 911 location accuracy today, a lot of the public safety officials will say privately they haven't, they've called for the line, they want the 4 level, but they'll say they're really worried about the 3 meters, just in the sense that you get a call and if at the FCC building they don't know if it's on the 6th floor, 7th floor, 8th floor because it's 10 feet. Is that something that is concerning? And do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Yes, and my viewpoint is that we'd like it to be, not have to have such a differential. You'd like it to be, pinpoint accurate. But we have to accept the, fate where technology is at this current moment. What we're talking about and adopting today is based on the test bed at 3 meters. It's not something that's in the marketplace that's available. So we're talking about something here and trying to adopt that in a certain time frame. So I would love it to be pinpoint accuracy. Exactly where everyone is at any given moment for that purpose, for an E911 circumstance. But the technology is not there at this current time period. That doesn't mean it can't be, and it won't be, and I'd like to see it be the case in the future, but we have to adopt what we have, and we have to understand reasonable capabilities when we adopt our rules.
Yeah, I agree. We put a lot of options on the table, including 3 meters, including seeking comment on whether we can do more, and whatever's implementable, whatever is going to be pinpoint accurate and implementable, I think we're all for that.
Yeah, I'll ask you guys about Lifeline. Do either of you have any concerns that eligible low-income consumers are going to be de-enrolled or prevented from signing up because of these system shortcomings in some states in particular, including rural states? And is there anything the FCC should do about it?
Now, I'm always happy to take a look at these issues and work through them. At this point, that's not an issue that I see, but happy to work through it, and we can make whatever adjustments we need to make.
I would say I don't have I have heard some of the early issues, but I don't have the greatest relationship with USAC in terms of knowing how things are working over there, and I've suggested many different ways to reform that process. And I'm hopeful that the National Verifier will fully meet what was intended to come from that. And if there are problems with it, they be worked out. But I'm not integrally involved in that process at the current moment. Further questions from anybody this fine day? Oh, I see a hand.
Hi, yes, me again. It's about the Pirate Act that has gone from the House to the Senate. Do you think it's going to work? Do you think it's a priority? Do you think the FCC should have more enforcement money to spend to do this? Thank you.
So I think you mixed a couple different things there, but it's not an authorization of more money. It's new tools in terms of enforcement and heightening the fines. I've endorsed the bill, supported the bill, but it is a legislative vehicle, not something that I wrote. And so I look forward to Congress disposing it as it so chooses. I do think it's important that we address the enforcement side of pirate radio. I think I heard Commissioner Stark say some nice things about those that need, that those are operating outside, illegal operating in bands that need to be enforced. So I'm anxious to talk to him about perhaps working on pirate radio together on this issue. But I think that if you ask the question, enforcement is only going to be one side of the equation. It's also how do you deal with the fact, heightening the activity. And we did a number of different events recently. How do you show people there are other avenues like internet radio and other things to that nature? So enforcement would be only one tool. There are other ideas on how do you increase enforcement that I've previously put forward, and we'll see if this doesn't work to its full extent. Then we'll see if other ideas are needed.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Helen Brown or whatever.
All right, I'm going to have to duck out of here in another 10 minutes. So let's get started.
Okay, Howard Busker, Communications Daily. I wanted to ask you about something that came up during the meeting, and I guess my question is, did you engage in political gamesmanship on the wireless 911 item?
I think the first duty of the public servant is the public safety. And I make no apologies for pressing for tighter standards, stronger results so that first responders can find you when you call. We have not proposed a standard for floor-level accuracy. I think that's a problem. I think we should be more ambitious when it comes to issues of public safety, and for that I make no apologies.
And for the record on that,
I approved the item because I think it is getting us started on saving lives. I think the item, given the existing technology that we have, I am glad that the item is going to get the Z-axis out there. Again, the other things that it did with the privacy that I called for, Lifeline as well. But I agree with the commissioner that we need to get to a place where we know where folks are on a single floor. And so that is going to be important.
And just real quick to follow up, talking to the public safety guys, I mean, they'll say they're not even sure how much having the VXS helps, except for maybe in a big multi-story building, it might provide some.
We're not making enough progress. This agency should be pushing technology forward. There are 240 million calls every year to 911. 80% of them come from wireless phones. It's time for us to make sure that every one of those calls has precise location information. The standard we've proposed today is not that. I think we should push to do better, have tighter standards, and make these standards apply nationwide faster.
And again, on where we need to get to, floor accuracy, I completely agree with the commissioner. What I voted for as a practical purpose for today is getting us out of the lab, getting us out of the testing phase, and getting us into this actually helping to save lives.
Thank you.
Hey, Margaret McGill with Politico. A question I've been asking everybody about 24 gigahertz and the public concern from different members of the Trump administration on whether or not using that for 5G will interfere with, I guess, weather observation satellites. Having the government kind of divided on this spectrum, how do you think that could play as the U.S. seeks to set global standards for this band to be used in 5G?
This is embarrassing. In this administration, the right hand is not talking to the left. And we've got this late-stage dispute and exchange of letters right as we head into the World Radio Conference and as an auction is ongoing. This is clearly not the best way to do things. And I think we're going to have to figure out how to do better going forward as a matter of spectrum policy and as a simple matter of governance.
Mr. Starks?
Yeah, from my perspective, obviously I didn't previously participate in the 24 gigahertz, and so I just woke up to this issue 36 hours ago. My understanding is that there was a lot of interagency coordination before, and so these calls here at this time seems like, obviously we're not a court, a quote-unquote court, but it seems like an emergency injunction. And so it doesn't quite seem like, again, I need to study what happened, and I certainly agree that we need to do the right thing. Public safety is at stake here, but it seems like an extraordinary remedy that is part of this tug of war that doesn't seem like it's making sense.
Hi, excuse me, Kelsey Griffiths, Law 360. I was wondering if you agree with the characterization on last week tonight that the FCC isn't doing enough to crack down on robocalls.
Here's what I know. The number of robocalls we're getting is bonkers. At the start of this administration, consumers got roughly 2 billion robocalls a month. By the end of last year, that number was 5 billion. That increase is insane. Whatever this agency is doing is not enough. I appreciate that we have had high-level fines, but they've been for a handful of bad actors. This is like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. We've got scam artists all around who are flooding our phone lines. This agency needs to require call authentication technologies. We need to figure out how to have bigger fines, and we need to figure out how we can get the statute of limitations extended. And if that doesn't work, we're going to have to figure out how to bring carriers into the fray to help us solve this problem. And in the meantime, we have more than 20 petitions involving robocalls that are just sitting around and gathering dust. We should be acting on every one of them. And we've got a remand from the court that goes to the heart of what is a call that involves an auto dialer. We still haven't responded to the court on that, or issues that have come up in that decision about how consumers can revoke consent. We have a lot of work to do. There is nothing satisfying about what the agency has done to date, and every one of us knows it because we've seen an incredible expansion in the number of robocalls on all of our phones.
and agree with that. I don't think there's anything. Yeah, there's a legislative piece that needs to happen. I agree, especially as a former enforcement officer. The extending the SOL so that we can find these folks that are the robocall spammers, that we can get them and that we can really wham them. There is an industry piece that is significantly needed. It's call authentication. I am also now in favor of free blocking. Free call blocking, I think, is something that, and we do know that at least one major carrier out there has already done it, so there is a clear business case for that to happen. And then there is an enforcement piece that also does need to happen. But robocalls really have changed the fabric of our culture, where people don't pick up the phone. You know, where I'm from, people used to, it could be your neighbor, could be your pastor, could be your kid's school. And so it is the single highest complaint that we hear at the FCC and the FTC, by the way. And when you, year over year, have a problem that's getting worse, and it is the #1 complaint, we have to address it, and something's got to be done.
John Reed, Bloomberg Law. For either of you on the C-band, would either of you guys support a private sale approach that's being pushed by some of the satellite companies, or should it be like a public auction? There's been some more interest on Capitol Hill recently. I'd like to get your guys' thoughts.
I don't have any particular thoughts on that. I haven't studied that.
There's a proceeding before us that's still continuing. As a personal matter, I think good governance requires that we actually get an independent third party to identify just how much these airwaves are worth. I think that would be an important step forward so that both this agency and Capitol Hill could decide how to proceed.
Yeah, I wanted to ask the same question that I did about Sinclair to the other commissioners. To you guys, do you think the FCC is obligated to take up the issues around that HDO again if Sinclair applies for a transfer or renews a license or does something to its licenses? Does the commission have to take it up then?
Under the Communications Act, licensees have character, financial, and technical qualifications. This agency has unanimously found, in the context of a prior transaction, that this licensee engaged in misrepresentation and lack of candor before this agency. As a result, I think we should start an investigation now, and we do not have to wait till 2020 when those licenses are up for renewal.
Yeah, so those licenses as of now are up in June 2020. There have been calls to expedite that. But even under the ALJ's order, and I'm reading from it right here, where she previously says that character misrepresentation is something that fundamentally goes, it should be part of the investigation and fundamentally goes to whether they should hold a license. She says that inquiry would be more appropriately considered in the context of a future proceeding in which Sinclair is seeking commission approval, for example, involving an application for a license assignment, transfer, or renewal. So what she basically said is, I save that character representation for another day. I think at a minimum, that another day will be when there's a renewal or license transfer.
Thank you.
I'm going to have to get going in a second, so.
My question was for Commissioner
Okay,
Starks.
all right. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Oh.
Sorry, but while you're still here, if I can I just wanted to, I'm Toby from Policy Tracker. I wanted to know if you thought the Spectrum Horizons NPRM was rushed in any way, because it doesn't address a lot of items that it was wanting to address. Thank you.
I don't think it was rushed. I think it was a thoughtful effort. I appreciate that it involves experimental licenses and 4 significant bans for unlicensed. And what was most important to me is that we do not prejudge the need to have licensed spectrum in these bands. There is so little in the way of current operations, so little in the way of interference, and lots of opportunity with directional antennas. I want us to figure out a more modern way to approach these bands, and I do think we've at least laid the framework where that would be possible in the future.
I have no basis to think it was rushed either.
Hi, Commissioner. So at least one of your colleagues has been critical of the agency's merger review shot clock process when it pauses the shot clock. I know you can't comment on any particular reviews, but in general, are you comfortable with the current agency process for that, or do you think the informal shot clock process should be changed at all?
I wouldn't, I would say I haven't thought long and hard about it. Obviously, on mergers, there's a lot of starting and stopping. That certainly does seem hard from the outside perspective to understand, and we're obviously still digesting some mergers before us, but I don't have like a particular thought on whether the 180 shot clock should be abolished or anything like that, no. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, do you have any concerns about the Lifeline National Verifier process and that people maybe being threatened to be de-enrolled or being prevented from enrolling because of system shortcomings? And is there something the FCC should do about it?
So I appreciate the question, and it's an important question. I do have significant concerns. If folks are getting kicked off, if folks are not being able to enroll that are otherwise fully eligible to be enrolled in the Lifeline program, simply because the verifier is not, obviously the verifier had a long time getting up and rolling, and then now it sounds like we're hearing that the verifier is actually having problems in its execution phase as well. And I don't think I'm breaking confidences that I am set to meet with the head of USAC here in the coming weeks. I know scheduling is scheduling for me as the new commissioner, but I am set to meet with the head of USAC, and I am specifically going to address this because it is deeply problematic for Lifeline folks that need this the most, that they are not getting the service that they need simply because the verifier can't get things right.
Yeah, I have a question about the Pirate Act, because you're coming from the enforcement side of things.
About
the Pirate Act, which just left the House and is in the Senate, and it proposes to increase the fines for pirate radio by 10 times. And I was wondering if you thought that would actually be a good disincentive, because I understand that mostly these pirate radio guys don't end up paying the fines because of various reasons. And also, if you think that pirate radio should be a priority for the FCC to clamp down on, or if it's a victimless crime, if you like.
I don't have, I'm still thinking through pirate radio. It's nothing that came before me in my enforcement capacity. It's nothing that's come before me in the 6 weeks that I've been here. And so it's something that I'm looking forward to studying further. Yeah. Yep.
I got one more question. You expressed concern about the broadband deployment data in light of the concerns that Free Press had raised about one of the carriers' data. And you said you should get to the bottom of it, and the FCC should get to the bottom of it. Can you update us? Are efforts being made to address that? Is that going to slow down release of the report, the 706 report?
So, yes, and thank you for that question. In my mind, what we're hearing as alleged for barrier-free is problematic. The first thing that I would say is, it sounds like there's an overinflation of something in the order of 60 million, which is a staggering number. And what I also would point out is, with regard to data here, I'm obviously a former prosecutor, and what comes to my mind is a repeat offender here. Because with regard to data, we obviously know that we had to suspend Mobile Fund 2, MF2, because of the data that was there and the fact that we could no longer, something everybody knew, rely on that being accurate submission data of what coverage there was. And so we had to stick a pin in MF2, which is a huge deal. Here for the 706 report, we're now also seeing that there is data that clearly, as alleged, looks inaccurate. And so from my perspective here, I'm still a little surprised that, as far as I know, the 706 report is still on circulation. Certainly seems to me that it needs to be taken down. Some more due diligence needs to be done, and looking at the data and figuring out how folks want to go forward. It's the FCC's job to have accurate data and maps based on it, and That's just on the data question. More holistically, the rosy picture that the chairman portrayed in the 706 report is something that I'm also, I think, going to ultimately have to take a very fine eye to.
Have you voted on that report yet?
No. Again, in my mind, the report needs to be taken back to the chairman's office to further be worked. When you have, the report that the digital divide is closing, and then you have what, as alleged, of course, is over 60 million fraudulently overinflated numbers by Barrier Free. It seems to me that it's the only thing that the chairman can do is take that report down, say that they're going to further investigate it. My understanding is that there's now an investigation open with regard to Barrier Free, which again, so I don't know where that is, but it does remind me again, of course, that with regard to MF2, there was an investigation of the carriers there that allegedly overinflated their coverage maps there too. And so obviously as a former enforcement official, I'd like to know where those investigations stand. Yeah.
Oh, super quick question.
Yeah.
Jonathan Make at Com Daily. I guess Kelsey and I have been asking the offices about the robocall situation, TCPA. So 2 quick questions on it. What other actions, regulatory, not enforcement actions, do you think the commission needs to take to execute on the statute? And then is your office still getting the Last Week Tonight show robocalls, or did they end?
I did get them. They included bagpipes. Seems that John Oliver knows good bagpipe playing. I don't believe that I'm still getting them. But I know there was a question earlier where somebody asked whether I believe those John Oliver calls were illegal robocalls. And I know, I think somebody deferred to the general counsel's office.
Sorry.
Yeah, in my mind, those certainly are.
The question.
Say it again.
I was just going to clarify the question. My question is just about other regulatory, not enforcement actions that you believe are pending or that the FCC should act on generally, under TCPA on illegal robocalls.
Yeah. So the question I'm answering is, I think somebody asked earlier whether there was whether those were illegal robocalls from John Oliver. I believe they're not. There is obviously in this country a First Amendment protection for folks to petition the government. And so it's obviously nothing that I've looked at closely, but I certainly believe that those would fall within that category as somebody who is raising their concerns to us in our official capacity and our regulatory capacity, and that those would be protected by the First Amendment. I think somebody said that the General Counsel should look into that. In terms of regulatory-wise, I don't think that the chairman has taken up what the courts kicked back to us with regard to TCPA. I certainly think that it's something that we have to actively move as expeditiously as possible in order to curb these robocalls.
This is regarding the recent remand of,
Yep.
I guess, what's not a dialer?
Yep.
Thanks.
All righty. My first time up here solo.